Welcome to the DCA AGM. It's a delight to be in the chamber, both to actually be here, but also to see people in 3D after 15 months, so that's got to be good news. Could I especially welcome the newly elected members? It's great to have new blood. I think normally 5 of us are new, so that's great. In my view, although I may be biased, DC's committees are some of the most important and most effective committees of the council. I do hope you enjoy this. In my view and my experience, I've always found listening to public forum and also to fellow members in debates, rarely do you leave with your views unaltered, so I do urge you to listen. I do have 2 items of safety information. Firstly, can I remind people, if the fire alarm goes off, it will be for real. They should exit via the central entrance or exit, and they should reassemble on the piazza by the cathedral. Secondly, for the public, we have public lavatories either side of the main entrance. Items 2 and 3 are for us to note the chair or chairman, as I prefer, according to the Local Government Act. Myself, Councillor Eddy, and the Vice Chair, Councillor Alexander, as approved at the recent council. Could we move on to membership of the committee for? That's on your papers, of course. Can we note that, please? Fifthly, we have terms of reference. Assuming there are no questions, I'll formally note that. Fine. Sixth, we have future meetings. Can I pass over to Jeremy Libet for this?
Yes, Chair. Just to confirm that there are some proposed dates there for the remainder of the municipal year. Apologies, first of all, that the 3rd of November date, 3rd of November 2021, was missed off the original list, so the agenda was republished with that date included. The principle that is proposed here is, as has operated in previous years, that it should operate on a 6-week cycle on Wednesdays, alternating between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So it's over to the committee to decide whether they want to agree to those proposed dates.
This matter was raised at the agenda conference recently with the 3 party lead members. The view of all of us should be we should keep alternating on the basis we're here to serve Bristolians, not ourselves. So I think alternating, meeting in the afternoon and the evening, allow the public to freely and fairly turn up. Are there any contrary views? No, in which case, can I formally move that? Do we have a seconder? Thank you,
Councillor Alexander seconding.
So I'll move on
just to confirm that committee agree with the proposed dates. Yeah, thanks.
Apologies, Devon.
Yes, 2 apologies, Chair. Councillor Fee Hance, who's being substituted before by Councillor Tony Dyer, and also Councillor Paul Goggin, who's been substituted for by Councillor Chris Jackson.
Thank you, Jeremy. May I suggest we'll briefly introduce ourselves, since we're a new committee with several new members. For members who haven't been in this chamber before, when you speak, you press a button in front of you which should glow red, and when you finish speaking, please turn it off. So I'm Councillor Richard Eddy, Tory from Bishopston. Councillor Alexander?
Councillor Don Alexander, Councillor for Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston, and Vice Chair of the committee.
Councillor Hume?
Councillor Philippa Hume, new councillor for Horfield Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
Chris Jackson, councillor for Philwood.
Councillor Hathaway.
Tom Hathaway, Councillor for Clifton Down Ward.
Councillor Dyer.
Councillor Tony Dyer for Southfield Ward.
Councillor Varney.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Andrew Varney, newly elected member for Brisbane West, representing Liberal Democrat Party.
Councillor Geeta.
John Geeta, Councillor for Avonmouth and Lawrence Western Ward.
And Councillor Plowden.
Councillor Ed Plowden, newly elected member for Windmill Hill. Thank
you very much. Can I move on to declarations of interest? Are there any of these? Tony?
Yes, I'd like to declare that I'm a director with Bedminster Bid.
That's in connection with the first, yeah. Right, fine. Could I move on to the minutes of the last committee? In fact, only Don Alexander was here, so Don, are they correct?
They are, Chair.
Thank you. I'll move them. Secondly, are they approved? Thanks. Therefore, can we move on to appeals? So Gary Collins will deal with this. Gary, could you introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Gary Collins. I'm the Head of Development Management here at the City Council and Lead Officer for the DC committees. So every meeting, the DC committees receive the same report. So all members of the DC committees are kind of informed of current appeals that we have. Members will recall from the training that appeals come in three types. There's the majority are written representations, then there's those considered through informal hearing, and then at the kind of sharp end really there's the ones considered by public inquiry. So the report that you get is kind of listed in that kind of order. The first section in fact kind of splits off those householder applications that are subject to a faster track process administered by the planning inspectorate, and then we go on to the hearings, then the inquiries, and then the final part of the report looks at appeal decisions received. So before we get to the appeal decisions received, I just wanted to update members on a couple of appeals that are being considered through public inquiry, and so these are on page 24 of the papers. The first two are the same application basically, and this is land and buildings on the south side of Silverthorne Lane in the Temple Quarter Enterprise Zone. So this was an application that was actually supported by the council. This committee resolved to grant permission for that mixed use development. However, there was a holding objection from the Environment Agency. Due to that, the Secretary of State called in the application for his own determination, and so over a period of 3 or 4 weeks in the recent times, an appointed inspector has been hearing evidence from all sides about that. And so that concluded, I believe, only yesterday, and so that inspector will then write up their report. That will go to the Secretary of State, and then probably around about the end of the year we will get a decision letter from the Secretary of State, which will also include the background report that the inspector will have prepared. So we will obviously inform you when that decision comes through. And then following a similar process is the final item on that page 24, which is item 14. And this is the site at the former Police Dog and Horse Training Centre on Clanage Road, where the committee, I can't recall whether it was DCA or DCB, resolved to grant permission for this development, which was to relocate the Caravan Club from their current site at Baltic Wharf to this new site in the Greenbelt. Again, because the Environment Agency had a holding objection on flooding grounds, but there's also the issue of Greenbelt development as well. Again, on this occasion, the Secretary of State has called in this application for his own determination. And you'll see there on the right the relevant dates. So the inquiry, which I think is a 1 or 2 week inquiry, commences on the 20th of July. So again, we'll keep you posted as to the outcome of that. But again, it follows the same process where the inspector will write up their recommendation and the Secretary of State will then issue a decision letter. So then turning to the decisions, I wasn't planning to go into any of these as such, but just to kind of explain some of the notes that are on the decisions. So the list of appeal decisions starts on page 29 on this occasion. And on the right, it'll say where the appeal was dismissed, so permission refused along with the council's decision, or it will say appeal allowed, so planning permission granted, so against the council's original decision. So that's hopefully fairly explanatory. What the additional note you'll also see from time to time is where it says either costs not awarded or costs awarded. So we only put that on where the appellant decides to apply for award of costs against the council. So, for example, item 50, 12 Lodge Causeway, it says appeal allowed, however, it says costs not awarded. So, in that case, the appellant got the permission thereafter, however, they would have put forward a case that the council had acted unreasonably in refusing permission, and in that case, the inspector didn't agree with that, felt that the council had acted reasonably, and therefore didn't award costs. In the thankfully rare occasion where costs are awarded, again, it will say costs awarded. So hopefully that was a useful explanation, Chair, in terms of the appeals report, and happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? No. Move straight on to enforcement.
Certainly, Chair. The enforcement report again comes to both committees every meeting. And what it is, it's a list of enforcement notices that have been served since the last time that you met as a committee. And this is there, just enforcement is generally dealt with under delegated powers, but it's just to keep you informed on activity that the council is carrying out in terms of formal notices served. And this will be a situation where negotiations will not have resolved the situation, and then it's time to kind of serve a formal notice. So there's a lot of activity going on outside of this process, but we operate a system in terms of enforcement where we do seek to negotiate, but we'll only allow a limited window for that to kind of bear fruit, really. And so, as you'll see on this occasion, there are 4 notices served, mainly during May, since the last time that this committee met. So happy to take any questions on those at all, Chair.
I don't think there appear to be, so thank you, Gary. Can we move on to item 12, public forum? It's the convention on this committee to take it immediately before each individual item. So we'll take the 3 items in order on the agenda this afternoon. Could I just say, because of COVID precautions, members of the public who've submitted statements are waiting in the conference hall. They do have access to this meeting, of course, but they'll be ushered in individually, say their statement, then actually leave. The others, I've actually will note, members already have had the chance to read their report, their submissions, so obviously each will be taken fully into account before we make our decisions. Finally, could I also say members have already had the chance to read the statements, so could I ask members of the public, please, to restrict their comments to only 1 minute, summarising their statement? That would be very helpful, please. Thanks. So with that, can I move on to item 3? So the first item is Dalby Avenue, Bedminster. So the first person I have there is Mr. Roland Oliver.
Good afternoon. I think that any impartial observer looking at this development would notice that the density and the height are twice anything that might reasonably be expected. The original application, or rather the original plan, was to accommodate 500 students, about the same population as Bristol Prison. This soon increased to 600, then 700, and now it's over 800. The officer in his report implies that it is not valid to compare the building heights, the tall building heights on this site, with the rejected 9-story building blocks on the one Bringinson hillside down the road. He says this is because the frontages, the street frontages on this side are 65 metres and 95 metres, and thus shorter than the 135 metres of the Pring site. He omits to mention that this site is 150 metres across. He does mention the separation between the so-called finger blocks, but the verified montages make clear that this does not...
Could you sum up, please,
Yes,
Mr. Oliver?
The verified montages make clear that this does not dissipate the overall impression of a massive block, 30 metres high, filling a 10,000 square metre site. Thank you.
Diane James.
If this was a good plan that would improve people's lives and provide homes and allow the area to flourish, would nearly 200 people have objected, along with the following well-respected local groups? The Conservation Advisory Panel object to over-intense development, the monstrous scale, mass and design, which will cause significant harm. BS3 Planning Group object to the massing and query why it's student accommodation when we actually need family homes. WHAM, which is the Windmill Hill and Malago Planning Committee group, went to all the consultations, yet didn't recognise the final plans when they were published, as they had changed so much. And they also refer to the points raised by the planning inspector when he dismissed the appeal against the refusal for Plot 1. The Civic Society objects to the unacceptable impact of massing on Victoria Park and the City Farm.
Could you sum up, Diane, please?
Pardon? Yes, yeah. Bristol Cycling Campaign objects as the development doesn't adequately accommodate cyclists. And the CDG group have concerns over cumulative and visual impact. Now, these groups are well respected, local groups. They can't all be wrong. So I'm asking you to say no to this application. Thank you.
Could I just remind members of the public, obviously you're bound to be passionate, of course, but members do have a written copy of your statements and we've actually read them, so you're probably doing your service or your interests a disservice by extending, because that means less people can actually speak. The third person is Dr. Cameron Beaumont.
The information on sunlight to outdoor areas of the farm is misleading. It reports minimal change to levels of sunlight, but they haven't measured levels of sunlight. They have measured the percentage of ground receiving over 2 hours of sunlight on a particular day, the 21st of March. Then they've looked to see if that percentage will change after the development is built. But under that analysis, if an area currently receives 6 hours of sunlight, and that was to drop to 2 hours after the development was built, they would report that as a zero change, because neither drops below 2 hours. I would say a drop from 6 hours to 2 hours is quite significant. At present, the farm gets the sun right up until the very late afternoon, even in December. Our analysis shows that if this development is built, in December the shade would start at noon, and by 2 p.m. all of the outdoor space on that side of the farm would be in shade. On the 21st of March, the shade would start encroaching at 2 p.m. It is ludicrous to talk about a zero change to levels of sunlight. BRE guidance might say that 2 hours a day is enough, but is that really all we want for our Bedminster children? We know how important vitamin D is for fighting COVID, and especially for ethnic minorities. We requested a professional analysis of this, but this has not been done. Thank you.
Max Fried.
Thank you. This development will act as a catalyst for the regeneration of Bedminster Green, enabling the highway and River Malago improvements through our land transfers to the council and making large SIL and Section 106 strategic transport contributions. It will help with the revitalisation of nearby East Street. Over £5 million of annual student expenditure will be a massive boost to the local economy. There will also be a significant increase in the number of on-site jobs, both during the construction period and in the years to come. This BREEAM excellent development reuses brownfield land, is sustainable, promotes the use of public transport and is virtually car-free, delivers an additional 40 trees and over 1,000% biodiversity net gain. This has been a collaborative planning application, fully compliant with the Bedminster Green framework, with no objections from any statutory consultees or BCC officers, and is delivered with the support of and on behalf of the University of Bristol, and we strongly urge you to follow your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. I represent the applicant in my role as planning agent for the application. Now, the determination of this application requires a weighing of various planning policy considerations. We've got the presumption in favour of sustainable development that sits at the heart of the planning system. We've got the adopted local plan. We've got the policy direction given by the emerging local plan review, and we've got other material considerations such as the Bedminster Green framework and the Urban Living SPD. Now, taking all these matters into hand, your officers have concluded that our proposals for Plot 3 are sustainable. They align with the Bedminster Green framework and the policy direction given by for Central Bedminster. And through the technical information that we've provided with the application, we've demonstrated that this brownfield development delivers a wide range of benefits in terms of regeneration. They go beyond the site and they far outweigh the limited harm that may be attributed to this development. We do this in a manner that protects local amenity and with development that achieves excellence in terms of climate change adaptability and energy.
Could you sum up, please?
With your officers confirming that our proposals represent sustainable development, we urge the committee to accept the recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you very much.
Ian Jenkins.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian Jenkins and I've worked in Bristol for over the last 35 years. I'm a director of AWW and lead architect for this exciting scheme. We've worked hard over the past 18 months with Bristol City Council's City Design Group to ensure we create a scheme that enhances and captures the essence of Bedminster, including the use of colour with high-level coloured metal panels, the bricks, the brick detailing, use of glazed bricks, the artistically designed window panelling, all echo the historic uses on the site. The depth and proportion of the elevations all reflect the honesty of the design, including the variation of height, the site's permeability, views through and between the buildings. The sustainability of the design is critical to the scheme. The use of rain gardens to collect water, the orientation ensuring good natural light and ventilation to the rooms, highly insulated, and the ability to generate electricity on site with the use of photovoltaic panels have all added to the desire to open up the Malaga River, regenerate and rejuvenate it, including new tree planting, increasing the ecology with new fauna and flora, and to wish to pedestrianise the scheme, improve cycleways, and help Bristol City Council improve the road infrastructure around the site have all been achieved. Therefore, I thoroughly recommend the scheme to the committee. Thank you.
Dan Tapscott.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm Dan Tapscott, a locally based chartered surveyor specialising in daylight and sunlight amenity. I sit on the Design West review panel, so I understand the challenges of Bristol's changing landscape. I undertook the detailed and highly accurate assessments in accordance with the council's policy requirements and have been involved since an early stage in the design process, looking at the various iterations of the proposal. The analysis has looked at all the neighbouring properties, including the city farm. I've considered the objections received and can confirm there will be no adverse impact in terms of daylight, sunlight or overshadowing to the buildings or green grass areas of the city farm. The analysis has also considered the levels of daylight and sunlight received within the proposal, giving a high degree of compliance in comparison with various Bristol-based developments. My involvement looked at the internal arrangement of the rooms as well as optimising the glazing. In particular, the tall window head heights to the study rooms mean good levels of light shall be received to the back of the rooms. My conclusion is that the scheme has been designed with good quality daylight and sunlight as a central concept. It will be a good neighbour as well as a nice place to live. Thank you.
Nick Townsend.
This is an ugly, dense development that's got just higher and higher in the various phases, and I think the local community have been conned by this developer in this way. It would have an adverse effect on the city farm, and I just encourage you to look at the images when they come up from the city farm and from Victoria Park. I draw your attention as well to climate change. Today, two items. One, dozens have died in Canada because of a record heat wave, and two, yesterday, billions in Glasgow need to be spent by 2050, and temperatures there will be 32%. They will be higher in Bristol, and yet we are still building concrete blocks that have been rejected time and time again by the local community. It's up to you to stop this. We're in the middle of this climate crisis, so please reject it. And just finally, I've been involved in Whitehouse Lane development. Bedminster Green, and this includes it, is now regarded just as a disaster already, and it will continue like that with its tower blocks and its car park. And I'm actually just glad I knew Bedminster before this damage was done. Thank you.
And finally, Helen Adsherd-Head.
Hello, can you hear me? Is that okay? But before I start my minute, could you bring up the picture of the building behind the city farm, please, so that we can see it? Do you have that? Is that possible? Could we have on the screens the
officer will bring it and actually talk to it later during his report. It's not normal procedure to then bring it up during the public forum. So we'll do that certainly later on.
If when you bring it up, if you could say this is the picture, please. That yeah.
David, if you could make that very clear, please.
Great. So have in your mind that picture that you have all seen of the city farm and that building behind it. Okay, here I go. The landscape and visual impact assessment, which includes these photos of the proposal from the park, from the farm, from the houses, says it all. The assessment concludes that there will be an overall benefit due to the regeneration of the site, but there will be an overall adverse effect due to the large scale of the development, the height and the mass. Which begs the question, why can't we have the benefit of the regeneration that we all want, but with a sensitive and realistic height and massing that doesn't ruin the local character of Bedminster? Of individuals commenting on this proposal, over 150 objected. Four wrote in support. Of the organisations, even those who declare that they are neutral can't help but object to the sheer height and mass that is so out of scale. Windmill Hill City Farm, the City Design Group, Historic England, Bedminster Improvement District, the Civic Society, the Conservation Advisory Panel, BS3 Planning and WAM, all, whether or not they're in favour or neutral, all criticise the size of the proposals.
Could you
sum
up, please?
We all want regeneration and investment, but this proposal brings with it too many disadvantages. Thank you.
Can I thank the public and members of the applicant's team for their submissions? We now move for the officer presentation. Can I just preface that with a request, especially for the new members? The first stage after the officer report is factual questions. We then move on to debate. So please don't conflate both, don't actually make a point, just ask a factual question. David, it's over to you, and I note you're sitting about 30 saw lengths from me, so presumably you fear I may actually try to stab you.
Thanks for that welcome, Chair. Good afternoon to members of the committee. My name is David Grattan. I have been the case officer for this application that's before you. I've also dealt with the pre-application inquiries, other applications and appeals that have been heard in the Bedminster Green area. So the site before us is plot 3 in Bedminster Green. If I can just go through the structure of the presentation, within the amendment sheet there was a minor update to the number of public responses received. There's been 5 further objections received, and those are noted, and there has been amendments to 2 planning conditions, and again those are set out. To assist members with the consideration of the application, I've split the presentation into 5 parts. We'll go through the application site just so that it's fresh in everyone's mind. We will then go through the proposals and the response to consultation in summary form. I'll then deal with the Bedminster Green framework so that members are aware of the various proposals that it put forward. I'll then go into the key issues which are set out in my report. Each key issue in the presentation should correlate with the report, so A through to F. I'll then just conclude with the recommendation. And just to confirm, Chair, slide 39 has the view which the last member of the public forum was mentioning, so I'll touch on that as well. I will say that normally I'd be accompanied by Lawrence from Transport Development Management. He's unfortunately not able to join us today, so I will do my best to cover any aspects in relation to transport and movement. Okay, the application site has been mentioned. I'll just point out some of the key aspects which have been referred to, maybe some of the comments. We have the curve of Dalby Avenue at one side of the site. We have Clark Street, which runs through the centre. We have the River Malago, which runs partly along Clark Street and then veers back towards Dalby Avenue. And then we have Whitehouse Lane, which has currently got a number of industrial units, etc. along it. We then have Windmill Hill City Farm, which has been referenced in a number of the public forum statements. You can see the extent of its grounds. There is a back gate which adjoins the application site in the location where the arrow is. So hopefully that's helpful just in orientating members to some of the key aspects of the site. I've just included this aerial imagery just to help put some of that in context. So you can see the boundary, which is heavily planted along the city farm. If you go along Whitehouse Lane, you can see the existing uses which are in place there. You've got some low industrial buildings and areas of car parking which are associated with it. We have Clark Street. You can see the small extents of the River Malago as it goes along the site. And you can see the adjoining units in St Catherine's Trading Estate. The site is across the road from St Catherine's Place, which has been subject to some redevelopment. So the office building, which members can see there, has been redeveloped into an 8-storey building. And there is a recommendation or a decision's been made for that application for the further redevelopment of that site has been approved, subject to legal agreement being progressed. Just one thing to point out is that the Cabot Motors, which is on the very corner of the site, isn't part of the application proposals. These are some of the photographs which I've taken across the site. So if we go to the Dalby Avenue side, we can see the view from Dalby Avenue across the existing car park. We can see the industrial units which are in the foreground, and in the background we can see the properties on Windmill Hill. To the right, we can see the fence which is in existence, and that exists between the car park and the River Malago. And in the background, we can see the Windmill Hill business estate. The bottom two photographs show the current condition of Clark Street. So it shows the extent of the overgrown nature of things and planting, and you can see the rear of the city farm there as well. There are some remnants of the wall which are along the River Malago there as well. This is a view from the top of Clark Street beside the city farm, looking back down, and again you can see the Windmill Hill City Farm, the industrial units, and the taller buildings in Polden House in the background. We have the boundary treatments of the adjoining units. You can see St Catherine's House, which is at 8 stories, which is across the road from the site. And there's a view of Whitehouse Lane and its current makeup. And then we've got a couple of photographs in terms of the current ability to view the River Malago and its condition. So moving on then from the application site into the proposals, the application has got 2 buildings, which are building A and B, and I'll go into detail on what each of those contains. Collectively, those buildings would deliver 82 cluster units, providing 819 bed spaces, of which 25 of those are fully accessible. There are landscape and public realm proposals, which I'll go through, access, car parking, as has been mentioned, relatively low car parking. We've got 4 disabled spaces and 2 for staff for the student hub. And then we've got cycle parking, so we've got 236 secure spaces for students, 14 for the workspace units, and there's visitor spaces across the development. Taking each of the buildings in turn, Building A is between 3 to 9 stories. It includes 33 student cluster units. It includes 445 square metres of social, study, meeting and meeting space. It also includes for reception and back of house facilities and some of associated cycle store, etc. Building B then ranges from 4 to 9 stories. It includes 49 student cluster units. This building also includes flexible workspace, so there'll be some employment use retained within that part of the site. It also includes social meeting and study space and the other associated facilities. If I just draw members' attention to this plan, it is quite helpful. I'll start from Dalby Avenue and work the way through. So we'll have the main entrance to Building A from Dalby Avenue. The yellow space is the student study and social space. The blue is the reception and back of house activities, and then we have in a lighter orange colour we have some of the student clusters, which you can see on the ground floor. On Building B, you can see again within the middle of this building is where that social meeting space would be. There is some facilities and cycle storage on the corner, and then in the darker brown we have the commercial units which front on to Whitehouse Lane. This is the landscape plan and adjacent works which is proposed to be undertaken by the applicant. There would be a connection running through from Dalby Avenue through to Clark Street, and then there will be works to the extent of Clark Street adjacent to the rear of the Windmill Hill City Farm, going down to the extents where Clark Street meets Whitehouse Lane, and then there'll be a new connection through this redeveloped site going from Whitehouse Lane through to Clark Street. As members will also have noted from the report, there is significant gain in terms of planting within the site. So there's 40 trees and additional planting which has been introduced, and hence there's quite a gain in the biodiversity value. I included this roof plan within the report to members. It shows the stepping of the various heights. So in building A, we have 3 stories at the entrance, 9 stories where it's at the top of the crossing of the river, and then it's 7 stories as it goes adjacent further down Dalby Avenue. Within building B, it is 4 stories adjacent to the farm at its closest boundary, raising to 6 stories, and then back to 7. And then along Whitehouse Lane, it is 8, it's 8, 9, and 5 stories. So those buildings which are adjacent to the farm are sort of 4 and 5 stories. I've got some further images which I can go into more detail on that. Another aspect of this plan was the green roofs, again to help members understand how the biodiversity gain figure was so high. There's been a decision taken to provide green roofs, and that's secured by way of condition. As I just go through the application proposals, I've taken some of the views which, if members have been on this site before, they would recognise. So this is from Dalby Avenue as it comes round from sort of East Street. And here you can see to the left-hand side of the image, we have a building at 9 stories, closest to the crossing of the Malaga River, and stepping down to sort of 7 stories. And then you can see the entrance, which is along the front. This is a closer-in CGI of that, which possibly shows the connection through to Clark Street, the extent of public realm which exists along the frontage, the planting. There is a lower podium level at the front to try and reduce the impact, and the taller elements being set back from the footpath, so the taller elements being possibly sort of 20 metres back from the edge of the footpath. This is just another view possibly showing some of the detail of that along Dalby Avenue. And again, this shows that view as you go down towards Bedminster Green with that lower element to the left and the landscape and public realm within the foreground, and also the inclusion of the, you can just see the inclusion of the outbound bus stop within the proposals as well. And this is a view from the rear of Building A, so you can see it's a substantial improvement to the ability to see the restoration of the River Malago, and there's some private student space to the left, which is on a terrace, and then to the right is this street through, and then you can see the trees further up to the city farm. Moving around to Whitehouse Lane, there's been mention of the route, so again we can see the height of the building adjacent to the boundary of the city farm. You can see the connection through to Dalby Avenue, and then we can see the possibly this angle shows the taller elements and an attempt to be set back. I appreciate the concerns and comments made by the public, but officers have worked with the applicant where possible to try and set some of the taller elements back from the street. And this is another image just further through showing the new link through from Whitehouse Lane. The view from Windmill Hill has been referenced, and I thought I would include this because it shows in context the view back from the elevated position on Windmill Hill back down into the Bedminster Green area. You can see the height of the buildings in the foreground. You can also see the redeveloped St Catherine's Place building, which is at 8 stories, as the emerging context, and you can see the heights of the buildings in terms of Building A and Building B. Just to run through some of the response to consultation that's been referenced, and I just want to make sure members are clear, but there was 78 responses to the original consultation, with 70 in objection, 4 in support and 4 neutral comments. As per the update sheet on the revised details, we've had 86 public responses, all in objection. The main points of objection are set out within your report, and I've detailed them within that, but in summary, they relate to height, scale and massing, as we've heard in the public forum statements, and the impact on Windmill Hill City Farm, effect on the amenity space, the number of students, concerns in sustainability, no affordable or social housing being provided, concerns around internal daylighting, public realm, and conflict on Clark Street. Of those in support, there's support for the public realm and increased ability for pedestrians and cyclists to go through the site. Support for the employment space on Whitehouse Lane, and the trees, the public spaces in the park along Clark Street, and the opening up and improvements to the River Malago. As detailed in your report, during the determination of the application, changes were made. I'll not go through this, but this is at page 44 of your report, and it details some of the changes that were made during the consideration of the application. In terms of the positions of various groups, in terms of interest groups and organisations, they are set out within your report. We have 2 neutral comments from the City Farm and the Business Improvement District. We have support from the University of Bristol, and then we have objections from Windmill Hill and Malago Community Planning Group. We have BS3 Group, the Civic Society, and the Conservation Advisory Panel. In terms of those external consultees, the site was within flood zone 2 and 3, and we have no objection from the Environment Agency subject to conditions. The site's also adjacent to the conservation area, and whilst they didn't object, Historic England raised concerns regarding the application on heritage grounds, and again that's detailed within key issue B of your reports. In terms of internal contributors, there are no objection from any of the council's internal contributors subject to conditions and obligations. Just moving on to Bedminster Green framework and what it entails, just for the benefit of members, the plot that we're considering is plot 3, and that's the orange plot which you can see on the screen in front of you. In terms of what the framework sought to do, particularly in relation to this site, is talking about a humanised avenue, which is along Dalby Avenue. They are talking about enhanced pedestrian and cycle routes through the site. And then there are subsequent proposals underneath the overall framework diagram, which I'll just go into. So here we have an avenue with street trees in terms of the Dalby Avenue frontage, river feature, so the potential to integrate the River Malago within proposals. There's the intention for pedestrian-friendly side streets, which are indicated. And then in terms of ground floor land use, in terms of the scheme in front of us, in terms of the ground floor, it had envisaged a residential and lively and flexible space on the ground floor, and again that's been provided in terms of the flexible workspace along Whitehouse Lane and the social study space along Building B on Dalby Avenue. I can come back to this diagram for those members maybe less familiar with it, but this is a building heights aspect of the Bedminster Green framework, which outlined some of the indicative parameters which would be considered to be acceptable in the Bedminster Green area. The application site, in terms of Dalby Avenue, it identifies it as mid to high, so between 6 to 9 floors. And then where we're closer to the Windmill Hill City Farm and the Whitehouse Lane portion of the site, it indicates it would be mid to high, which is 6 to 9, and then adjacent to the farm, you can see yellow there, where it would be proposed to be low rise between 2 and 5 floors. Just to summarise in terms of what the application delivers in relation to the framework and those parameters, it contributes to an avenue of street trees along Dalby Avenue, pedestrian-friendly side streets on Clark Street and Whitehouse Lane, and proposals integrate and facilitate improvements to public transport, walking and cycling, integrate and facilitate the river restoration, incorporate sustainable drainage into the landscape, create new green space at ground floor level, provide flexible floor space at ground floor level, and heights are within the parameters set out in the framework. So the consideration of the key issues, I'll maybe go into the heights in a bit more detail. I'm just mindful of time. I will probably focus more on key issues B around design and D in terms of impact on City Farm, and I'll cover the other aspects as promptly as I can. In terms of the principle of development, the site is allocated as a principal industrial and warehousing area. Within the application itself, the application, which is portion of the site which is towards Dalby Avenue, has been in a car park since 1973, so there's no loss of existing employment floor space or jobs in that bit. The Whitehouse Lane portion of the site has been a motor trade use. There are 2 businesses factoring in, and the proposals include for flexible workspace, so in total floor space there will be a loss in terms of use, but again in terms of the estimated full-time equivalent employees. Officers have also considered the development in terms of the function and viability of the wider area, and the environmental health officer has no concerns in that regard. And in terms of the use of the site for flexible workspace, that is supported by the proposals and in line with policy, and is considered that it could help support some of the wider functions of the industrial and warehousing area. The use of the site for specialist student accommodation, as set out in your report, the Council's housing test delivery results for 2017 to 2020 has indicated there's an identified need for housing. I appreciate this application is for student accommodation, but student accommodation does contribute to the Council's housing land supply. So in line with the MPPF, the application would use employment land in an area of high housing demand. The need for specialist student accommodation is identified in the merging policy and the local plan review, and the provision of the 82 clusters would contribute to those identified for the central Bedminster area. As noted in the report, a letter of support has been provided by the University of Bristol. Moving into design, I've sort of tried to break this down into a few bits. I'll go into layout and public realm. I'll go into height, scale and massing, some aspects on heritage and trees and biodiversity. In terms of layout and public realm, our colleagues in city design support the proposals. In terms of layout and public realm, the key aspects that they consider what creates a quality layout in public realm is the contribution on Dalby Avenue of the Avenue of Street Trees, and the improvements to Clark Street, the new link through from Whitehouse Lane, street tree planting along Whitehouse Lane, and then some of the site-wide aspects around incorporating blue and green infrastructure, integrating the River Malago, creating new ground spaces, and the sustainable drainage. So building A is a building of 3 to 9 stories, as I've outlined earlier. That's been considered acceptable due to the following factors. Its prominence of Dalby Avenue in the area's movement hierarchy, it being the main route. It's well recessed. It's got a podium following the alignment of the A38 and reduces the scale at pedestrian level. And the taller element at 9 stories emphasises the corner of building A as a marker and a positive re-establishment of the crossing of the River Malago. In terms of building B, I'm probably going to go into this one in more detail because a number of the comments have been received in relation to this. As I outlined, some improvements to this were achieved during the consideration of the application. There has been a small reduction in height of the block adjacent to the farm during the consideration of the application, and a reduction in the footprint of that building. There's been changes into materials and fenestration, and there's been an building line adjustment on Whitehouse Lane. There's also been the introduction of rain gardens and street tree planting onto the public realm on Whitehouse Lane as well. So if I just go through some aspects of what has changed. So on the left, members can see the application that was submitted and accompanying floor plan. So the points I'd just draw to your attention here are there's been, if you look between the two floor plans on the left and the right, you can see a reduction in the footprint. So the building is between 5 and 8 metres away from the boundary. And there's also been a reconfiguration of the massing so that the heights have been more stepped adjacent to the farm. This is the view which was mentioned within one of the public forum statements. On the left shows the verified view from Phillip Street, the entrance to the city farm, on the application as submitted on the left, and then some of those changes as outlined where officers have worked with the applicant to overcome some of those concerns. Another point which has been mentioned was I think the considerations of the Pring and St Hill appeal not being valid. They are valid and they have been considered as part of this application. In my report too, I've outlined some of the aspects which members have worked quite hard, or which officers have worked quite hard to achieve. So we've got 13-metre separation distances between the fingers of this block, and then at the upper levels, that's where it's at its highest. There's an 18 set back further, and it's an 18-metre separation distance. And again, that's allowing some visual permeability through the site. The other aspect of this has been to, again, on the right-hand side, we can see some of the changes to the materials and the fenestration in this area as well. This is a view from Bedminster Station platform. It shows the views through the one of those fingers, and you can see on the left you can see building A. You can see one of the fingers then in the where my cursor is, and then you can see the gap through the taller element at 9 stories, the gap, and then the stepping down off the building height to the right hand side. Again, one of the aspects around Whitehouse Lane has been the incorporation of street tree planting, improving walking and cycling along that side of the street on the applicant's side, and also having a lower element coming forward to try and make that the taller elements are set back from the footpath. Again, I appreciate that won't overcome some of the concerns which have been raised, but in balance, City Design Group have considered that to be acceptable. There was a comment about not the site being 150 metres deep, and it is from Whitehouse Lane to Dalby Avenue. A number of sections are provided and explored during the consideration of the application, just to give a flavour of some of those separation distances. So section 1.1 is at the middle of Clark Street, and that's about 17.5 metres in terms of the gap between the buildings, and then where you have the taller 9-storey element further within the site and to the Windmill Hill City Farm, that increases to nearly 26 metres. So just again providing that context in relation to that aspect of the design. And again, this is the visualisation which has been provided from Clark Street looking down, and the extent of the public realm that would be surrounding the taller element of building A. Comments have been provided in relation to heritage. The view is that that whilst Historic England have raised concerns, it's considered that any harm would be less than substantial. Any harm to heritage asset is given considerable weight. That's been considered by officers, and the public benefits in terms of the proposed development, its transport improvements and high quality public realm provision and incorporation of the River Malaga restorations are considered to be sufficient to outweigh that harm identified. Trees and biodiversity I've sort of covered, but there'll be 41 trees and a substantial gain in biodiversity across the site. In terms of transport, members had a briefing on aspects of Bedminster Green a couple of weeks ago. One aspect was the strategic transport work that's been undertaken. It's been undertaken in 2 stages, and the outcome of that has been a series of measures, interventions and travel planning initiatives to enhance and improve the wider regeneration of the area and achieving sustainable development and sustainable movement. A number of those things are restrictive parking measures in Windmill Hill, cycle improvements, traffic management, electric vehicle, car club vehicles, delivery of a travel plan and delivery of traffic regulation orders. There'll also be works secured by way of condition in terms of highway works and a 278 agreement to improve key areas of public realm adjacent to the site. And there'll also be the SIL funded works undertaken by the council in relation to public transport improvements along Dalby Avenue, and then wider walking and cycling improvements and works to Hereford Street and Whitehouse Lane. This is a plan which shows, I think was part of Lawrence's presentation 2 weeks ago, which outlined some of those wider transport movements, very much focused around prioritising public transport, walking and cycling. Members will note from the report there's a number of contributions which the applicant has agreed to. They relate to a number of those measures which are recommended via the strategic transport assessment. They're all agreed to and are subject to a draft section 106 agreement. Just moving on to issues of amenity. In terms of daylight and sunlight and internal amenity, there's high level of compliance with BRE guidelines in terms of the quality of the for future occupiers of the development. In terms of what's probably come out more in the public comments is around impacts on neighbouring properties and neighbouring areas. So a comprehensive assessment has been undertaken of neighbouring properties, around 64 of those. It looked at 824 windows, and only 5% of those did not meet the guidelines. A vast majority of those were workshops, given the industrial nature of the Whitehouse Lane area. There was also an assessment of the daylight distribution within the rooms, and again, only 2 rooms did not meet the BRE guidance, and again, they were marginally below the figures there, and those rooms were not living areas or residential properties. They were more commercial and industrial units where use of internal lighting is obviously part of their use. This is in your report, and I pulled out a summary of the table that was used. So the plan on the left shows the areas which were assessed. So that includes all of the grounds within Windmill Hill City Farm. So there are 9 areas. The table on the right then shows the outcome of that assessment. So there are so all 9 of the areas meet the BRE guidelines in terms of what has been assessed. There is no change in a number of the areas. So if I just go through them, area A1, it looks at the existing area which is lit. It looks at the area that's proposed and whether there's been any change. And there is no change in area A1. A2, there's a very minor, negligible change to area A3. It is less than 1%. Area A4 is less than 4%. A5 is 5%. And area A6 is 1%. The only other area is in A8. as officers have looked at this in detail, if we had concerns about the level of impact on the Windmill Hill City Farm, we would have insisted on changes to the scheme. We've already been to appeal on one application in this area where we had concerns on daylight and sunlight. The assessment that has been undertaken here has followed the guidance that the Council has produced. So the Urban Living SPD at Appendix B provides guidance on how applicants should approach developing schemes at higher densities. This scheme follows BRE guidance and the guidance within the Urban Living SPD, and your officers considered the city farm currently achieves good levels of daylight and sunlight and would do with the proposed development in place. The final matters in your report: flood risk, drainage, contamination and air quality. There all have been no objections subject to conditions. In terms of sustainable design and construction, the scheme will connect to the proposed district heat network and it will provide on-site solar PVs. The level of PV provision cannot meet the 20% reduction which we seek via policy, and therefore it is engaged what the Council has as an allowable solutions mechanism, and the calculation for that is set out within your report. And again, the applicant has agreed to the allowable solutions payment, and that would be secured by way of Section 106 agreement. As was outlined in the presentation by the public forum by the applicant, they are seeking to achieve BREEAM Excellent for both buildings, and that's supported by officers and would be secured by way of condition. So just to conclude matters, and apologies for the time it's taken, but the recommendation is to grant subject to planning agreement. Within pages 87 to 90 of the committee report, officers have considered the benefits and disbenefits of the application, and it's considered that the proposed developments in accordance with the development plan and the MPPF when read as a whole. Officers seek delegated authority to finalise the wording of the conditions and to progress to Section 106 to secure the obligations, and I've listed them out just for completeness. That concludes the presentation, Chair.
Thank you, David. We now move to factual questions to the officer. Could members who want to raise an issue signal by raising their hand? Then I'll call you in turn. And if you could put your mic on. Just before then, could I pose one question to you, David? English Heritage have cited some concerns. Frankly, I'm a bit mystified why. Could you highlight them a bit more, please?
Yes, I can do, Chair. I'll just refer to my report. So if members wanted to go to page 78 of their report. So the position of Historic England, they state in their original comments that they're not persuaded that the proposed development delivers a contextual approach and should be adjusted to represent a more positive response to the historic environment. They then responded when we received revised details, and a number of the materials and colours, etc., had been worked through with members of the City Design Group and the applicant. And then in relation to that, they stated, Chair, in their response that the scheme presents some positive moves to vary the palette of materials, addresses the format and proportions. However, there is still little positive response to the site context, and the proposed blocks would be discordant with their setting. As we've previously advised, the post-industrial aesthetic identified in the heritage statement would seem to be a perfectly valid steer. So that gives you an indication that they thought more could be done to possibly reflect the post-industrial aesthetic.
Thank you. Could we move to other questions, please, members? Tony?
Thank you, Chair. I think as was mentioned in the report, this site is adjacent to the Bedminster Conservation Area. In particular, it's adjacent to two character areas in particular, which is Bedminster Parade and East Street. Their characters are defined by building materials which are red brick, pennant rubber sandstone, and stucco rendering. I don't see much evidence of that in this proposal. Can you clarify if there is some of that?
Yes, I can do. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get to the right part of the report, but I suppose the changes that were made is possibly helpful if I maybe go to an image which shows yeah, so one of the aspects that the city design group worked with was around the brickwork, which you can see as a feature here, the introduction of colour and cladding, which was there, so trying to reflect modern design and choice of materials. I'm just having a check through some of the changes which were made as a result of their comments, but they wanted to add variety to the material, so that there's more added, and there was the introduction of a lot more colour, and you can particularly one of the elements that they went for was the cladding of the upper elements to try and lessen the impact of the taller aspects. So it was podiums at ground floor level, taller aspects which were set back. And then within that, there was changes made to increase the fenestration and the level of daylight and sunlight being received to the rooms. And then where there wasn't use of brick, it was the introduction of colour. And that's as shown here along Whitehouse Lane, what was sought to be achieved by the changes to the application made in relation to comments from City Design Group.
Ed?
Thank you, Chair. David, the planning inspector made some fairly uncompromising points about another very similar proposal building in sort of height, scale, mass, just 200 metres away. The adverse effects will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. I'm struggling to understand why this is not absolutely 100% relevant to this building and how the exact opposite conclusion has been reached by officers.
Yeah. Yeah, the Pring and St Hill appeal decisions on both applications were received in, I think it was the beginning of April. They were being considered as part of this. I think there are some, it's each scheme in its own merit. So I've outlined why our City Design Group colleagues believe that a 7 to 9 story building is justified in relation to Dalby Avenue because of its where it is in relation to the movement hierarchy. There are differences between this is a larger site, and I know that you'd said it's probably a larger development, but it is I think it's about a hectare. Sites are just slightly over. I think I tried to cover some of the points within some of the differences, but one of the key differences is the separation distances. So without going into everything with regards to the Pring and St Hill decision, there were issues over height, scale and massing, but it was particularly how tight that those heights were. So that was one aspect. So there's something that we have sought to work with here to improve both the separation distances as outlined here, but also at the upper levels. The other aspect here as well is that there is more variation in height. So the appeals that we were dealing with there, I think we had heights between 8 to 12 stories in one appeal and 7 to 9 on the other. And here we've got sort of 4 to 9 and 3 to 9. So there is some more variation and stepping off that massing, as well as it being greater separation distances to be achieved. So those are some of the aspects and consideration of that appeal decision in relation to this application.
I think Gary would like to add to that.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reassure members that what you always want in getting planning advice in an area is consistency, and absolutely, sort of David has headed the same team dealing with all of the plots and including work earlier on the framework. So obviously it is each case on its merits. It's a judgment on each individual application, but the officer team looking at this and working on it has remained the same. So I think it's genuinely this is where the benefits are outweighing the harm as well. And also, I would say, Bedminster Green has been challenging for everyone involved, and each of the developers have taken a different approach. And I would like to say, really, in terms of the developers of this application, they've been much more engaging, have taken more time. It's been a very exhaustive pre-app process, and even the negotiations during this application, they've been tough negotiations, really. There've been disagreements along the way. So it's good to see that we've reached a position where officers can recommend the scheme. And I think, we've set the same high bar for this scheme as we have for all the other sites. And, it's been a mixed track record, really, with 2 dismissed appeals and 2 resolutions to grant. So I just wanted to kind of put that out in the background, that it's certainly been the same team advising you and setting the same standards.
Ed?
I understand that, but in the report the harm is described as less than substantial. Could it still be very clearly argued, in line with the planning inspector, that it is nevertheless significant and demonstrable? And I'd also like to know how many of these sort of improvements that we've talked about were agreed upon when this was 500 students rather than 830, so that the benefits may be there, but have significantly diminished. The balance of benefits to disbenefits has changed a great deal, because all the benefits we've heard about in terms of the public realm, the transport, the economy, apparently would probably have been there anyway at the beginning of this scheme, when it was a much less massive and high scheme with less concentration of students.
I can address the less than substantial harm point first. So it's probably worth just going to the report and how that conclusion has been reached. I'm just going through, but it is also the opinion of Historic England, who are, I suppose, the government's advisors on impacts on heritage assets. I think if you go to their original response, it's on page 54. And I think it's on the sort of the 4th paragraph on that page, on page 54, and it says, while we do not consider that the impacts of the proposed development would result in unacceptable harm to the setting of the conservation area. So that is the advice that they have had, so that it would not result in unacceptable harm to the setting of the conservation area. That was in response to the application as submitted, and obviously went through some further iterations and improvements.
I guess what I was looking for was a sort of response to the difference between significant harm and not substantial. And given that a planning inspector on the same grounds, the size, the scale, the height, the massing, has said this is going to cause significant harm, I think the words, not substantial is just a way of ducking that particular assessment. So I'll make that my last question for now. I do have further questions if we have time, but I'd like other people to have a chance.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. Just a question about the numbers of students that will be occupying the new buildings. Obviously, a lot of people object to more student accommodation. They see the need for accommodation for other members of the local community. But I just wonder if you know what proportion of the students who will be occupying these new buildings will be a net increase in students in Bristol, and what proportion of those students will be relocating from other accommodation across the city, because obviously if they are relocating, that frees up accommodation for other members of the local community.
Yeah, we don't have exact sort of numbers on that, but I think it's on sort of page 72 of the report is that in terms of the provision of student accommodation, and we've got our existing policies. We have a new SPD that was adopted in November 2020 on the Article 4 directions, and it's those aspects working together help improve the choice of housing in the area. So reducing the pressure on the housing market, providing for the it allows that to provide for some more of the needs of different groups in the local community. So that was set out within the report. We've considered that in relation to the suitability of this location for student accommodation. We've also considered some of the student accommodation topic papers that exist in terms of the evidence. So yeah, it's one of those ones that obviously this is to make sure that the university can guarantee that requests for accommodation can be met by the university themselves.
Chris?
Yeah, I've just got one question. I read the report reference light issues with the percentages, but obviously the member, the resident who brought forward her view on it was considerably different than what was in the report. Can you just clarify that for me, please? Because that is important.
Yeah, I've just read that comment and tried to understand it as well. I suppose just to provide members with some assurance, the BRE guidelines is what is sort of used to assess, the impacts on daylight and sunlight. Our urban living SPD then we provide guidance on how we expect applicants when they're coming forward with their proposals to what they should do. And when we're looking at amenity spaces, they've applied the test so that the reduction is negligible. It's less than sort of 5%. Now we have to take a consistent approach because that's what the guidelines state. Those guidelines are around ensuring that good levels of daylight and sunlight are achieved, and this application during the pre-app stage we got them to do some initial daylight sunlight testing. Then the application, when it was submitted, it was done again, and when the revised details came in, that was updated. So we have looked at that at each stage along the way. The assessment that the applicant has done is correct. It's the one that we advise applicants to do. They've done it as an iterative process, so we've had some results presented to us as we've gone along, and any of the concerns that we had around those aspects have been assuaded by the detailed modelling that's been undertaken. And that's in relation to open space, amenity space, the Wimmill Hill City Farm, but also all of the adjoining properties, whether they're residential or commercial. It's been a very thorough assessment, and having looked at similar issues on the other sites in Bedminster Green, this is a very high level of compliance with those guidelines, higher probably than much higher than a number of the other applications. So hopefully that provides some helpful context. But I don't know what the alternative method put forward was, but your officers are content with what's being assessed as part of this application.
Thank you, David. And just a remark more than anything, that it's only 25 fully accessible units, which seems out of 800 and odd people, that's less than 3%, which seems a bit low, but obviously
that's a requirement of the university, and we have a similar policy for housing as well, which is 3-4%, so it's in line with that. But yeah, 25 of them are accessible.
Tony.
Yes, thank you. I've got a few questions, but these are very quick ones and they're on the same subject, so hopefully if I combine them together. It's in terms of the student accommodation, this is completely, in terms of residents, student-led. So my question is, you've mentioned the local plan review, and at the moment the local plan review is saying up to 1,000 student beds in central Bedminster, and obviously the central Bedminster area covers a much wider area than this single development. But this single development is proposing 819 of those beds, or well over 80% of them. And my concern is, looking at the statement from Bristol University, they mention that this provision or this development meets their minimum requirements. And they say that the minimum requirement is for at least 200 new bedrooms in any single location. So my question is, if this is providing 819 out of the 1,000, does that mean that there won't be any ability to provide any further student accommodation that meets Bristol University's own criteria of a minimum of 200 bed spaces?
Chair, if I could answer that one, please. So there are indicative figures in the local plan review in terms of student numbers in certain parts of the city. That's as much as they're indicative figures, because the local plan, because of the joint spatial plans sort of failed attempt to get to soundness. The local plan has been held up, and therefore it's not reached even further consultation draft yet. So limited weight can be given to a number of aspects of the local plan review, including these indicative numbers of students within parts of the city, because in order to reach numbers in an adopted local plan, there needs to be, there'll be differing views about what those numbers should be, and that would be through the local plan appointed inspector to hear evidence from all sides and to kind of recommend to the council what view it should reach, both in terms of what those numbers look like and also how hard and fast they actually are. Because it's very much a moving picture in terms of kind of student accommodation, but also about wider housing delivery as well. So it's not something that could be given much weight to, really. In general, the local plan does permit, an element of student accommodation within parts of the city in order to enhance areas in terms of being mixed and balanced. And this would be the first kind of introduction of student accommodation within sort of this particular area. In terms of sort of the wider kind of proposals, we do know that it is likely that another plot within Bedminster Green could include student accommodation, but that's still up for debate at the moment, whilst plot 1, Pring and St Hill, consider really the nature of their development, and that's something to be considered as and when they make their application. As Councillor Dyer has correctly said, though, Bedminster Green itself is only a small part of a wider central Bedminster area, and so in the near future the council will be bringing forward spatial frameworks in terms of other parts of central Bedminster, and there really it will need to take into account the need to accommodate a whole mix of development, so the housing that the city needs, employment space, either protection or re-provision, and also perhaps student accommodation as well. So in terms of what those other parts of central Bedminster will look like, what those key principles of new development will be, that will kind of come through an inclusive process in terms of further spatial frameworks. But at the moment I would say that really this development is clearly under that 1,000 indicative figure, and that is the thing that should be considered at this point in time, as and when further student accommodation proposals come forward that perhaps challenge that figure, then that's something really for then, I would say.
Tony, you have a supplementary.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we appreciate the vitality that students can bring to an area, but there is also obviously some concerns. There's outstanding concerns about the fact that if this is 100% student housing, there's no obligation to supply affordable housing, and also there's no there's exemption from council tax, for instance, to pay for services. But I guess the other question I would ask that could be answered, I hope, is that students are not in their student accommodation all year. There are some proposals here for pedestrian and cycling routes through the development. What analysis is done in terms of safety and overlooking for when the students are not on site and when they're away? Because some of those routes look like they can be quite scary with very little overlooking. So I just wonder what safety analysis has been done on those.
Chair, if I could come in again on that one, please. So I think one of the real driving forces between really our insistence with the developers that we work together on the Bedminster Green framework, it was that we didn't end up looking at isolated sites. Of course you do when you've got individual applications, but at least within a framework you've got a good idea as to what the mix of development is likely to be, and also what the key kind of bits of infrastructure and links are. So I think based on the framework, and also permissions that have also been granted subject to Section 106 agreement, we know at the moment there is a mix of housing, or student accommodations proposed through this application. At the moment, the area is a bit weak in terms of delivery of affordable housing. There is some being proposed and delivered on plot 4. A key to delivery of affordable housing in the area is next door to this one on plot 5, which is the council's site. So there are discussions ongoing between the council and its development partner in terms of delivery of truly policy compliant affordable housing. And I think taking that wider approach to the framework allows an area to be kind of planned more holistically, so that at least we know we've got a good idea what's either going to be delivered or what's coming further down the pipeline, really. And really in terms of sort of the kind of connections within the area and also to wider areas, it's whilst obviously this student development is at kind of one end of Bedminster Green, they're routes that be used by all users, really. So users of this site, users of the other sites within Bedminster Green, and also users of the surrounding communities as well. Because one of the key objectives is to kind of unblock kind of cul-de-sacs and that, and we've seen that through Clark Street at the moment. There's not that kind of good route through, so it will help kind of deliver those safer routes, and even when it's student accommodation, that there may be an occupation during a more limited part of the year, that there will still be kind of overlooking and good usage of those areas, I think, and certainly will be a big enhancement of what's there at the moment.
Could we finally go to Ed? But Ed, could I urge you to actually restrict your point to a question and not venture into comment, which we might more profitably use later?
I'm a little bit confused by the answer, Gary, I'm sorry. But on affordable housing, you say, well, the framework will take care of that, and we're looking at it in the round with the other neighbouring developments. When it comes to students, you're saying, oh no, we have to take this on a case-by-case approach. And I'm feeling that that's a little bit dissonant. So can you respond to that, please?
Yes, apologies. So obviously as a committee you're looking at this individual case on its merits and nothing else really, so that's the decision you're being asked to make today, and neither local or national policy allows us to require affordable housing as part of student development. So that's the policy position as it is. What I was just trying to do really, and David has done this as well through his presentation, was just to say that irrespective of the decision you make today, there is also a wider context to this, in that there is other development that's either already been permitted by this committee or is going to land with us as a planning authority in the next few months, that is for other types of development. So it won't all be student development, it all won't be private development with no affordable. So it's just to try and kind of reassure you that there are other decisions that have been made that will deliver different types of the nature of development, and also other types of development that are going to come in as planning applications. There's no guarantee they'll be delivered, but it was just to try and reassure you that there is a richer mix of development planned for Bedminster Green, and certainly the infrastructure that's planned within it is kind of captured and contributed to by all of those developments.
Philippa.
Thank you very much. One thing that comes up often when you talk about student accommodation is other local residents are concerned about noise and about rubbish. Could you confirm that this has taken this into account, and that the building will be suitably soundproofed, and that rubbish has been properly thought through? Thank you.
Yeah, I can pick that up. So in terms of the sound, that has been considered. Obviously, the building A is near Dalby Avenue, and building B is near Whitehouse Lane in the railway. So yeah, the acoustics and the sound emanating from the buildings is being considered, and there's a condition making sure that the measures identified in that report are secured. So that's that one. In terms of refuse, each building contains a refuge store, so dedicated facilities, and the servicing route for that is through the development and takes it off site. So that's been looked at. That's the level of provision has been deemed to be acceptable by Bristol Waste. They were consulted on the application. And then in terms of accessing those facilities, our colleagues in Transport Development Management are content with how that will be undertaken to make sure those issues in terms of nuisance and residential amenity in the wider areas is minimised.
Tom.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the initial suggestion that this site would be suitable for purpose-built accommodation for students 500 to 600. What reason did the developer give for the increase up to 837 for the initial proposals? And the other question centres around the breaking up of the massing using the fingered structures. It looked like from the pictures that standing directly in front, so from Bedminster Station, that you would be able to see through the development because of that finger structure. But it also looked like that would be the only place where that would break up that massing. Is that correct?
So, sorry, what was the first question? Sorry.
So the first question was about the initial suggestion of 500 to 600 student beds and why the increase.
Yeah, in terms of the increase in numbers, the applicant, when they initially did their engagement and initial discussions with the council, they were looking solely at the parcel of land which was on Dalby Avenue, so the car park, if you like. So initial discussions were on just to the left of Clark Street to Dalby Avenue, so it was a smaller portion of the site. So say 40% is the Whitehouse Lane section is then something that they have secured. I think I've detailed some of the engagement that they've done, which I think dates back to maybe 2017, 2018. So the land that they have been looking at proposals on has grown substantially as well, hence the increase in numbers. I think the numbers have also been driven by affordability issues around trying to make sure this is an affordable product for students, and that's, I think, referenced in the University of Bristol response. The council's also pushed for certain things, so the building line on both Dalby Avenue and Whitehouse Lane have sought to make sure that that can adequately accommodate both the public transport improvements, but also the cycling and walking improvements along Whitehouse Lane. So and we've also, within Building B, the original approach to that was to have it as a single development block with a courtyard that was student only within the middle, and our strong advice at the pre-app stage is we wanted a connection through that, so it had knock-on impacts around, you know, viability and numbers and things. So that's how it has increased, both in terms of the size of the site, but then possibly some of the things the site has been asked to deliver and accommodate as well. So that was that. And your point on the fingers, I do acknowledge that in my report. So if you're directly on, you can see through, but if you're at an opaque view, it will coalesce and you will have that impact. Where you won't be able to see those gaps, but through the consideration of the alternative was to have a more traditional perimeter block where you didn't have those gaps, and that was sought to be avoided for reasons which were related to the other appeal site and best approach to this particular aspect of the site. So hopefully that gives you an appreciation of how that form was arrived at.
The final question is from Andrew Varney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very simple question about litter, David. A lot of comments were concerned about litter in the River Malago and on the banks of the River Malago. And when you look at the diagrams, it seems on one side there's a very high stone wall, on the other side there's a bank that's sort of heavily planted. Is there any mitigation? Is there any plan in place for how that litter will be removed from the riverbanks and from the river itself?
You're right. From Clark Street, you'll have a wall, possibly with a railing, so that will protect people from going in. You'll have a terrace at the other side within the development. Because they're purpose-built facilities, there will be management staff to sort of permanently on site, so any aspect, be a managed site in effect, so any aspects of litter. If anything was to then, get in the Malago, etc., then it was quite obviously something from the student development that management company would be duty bound then to remove it, so it didn't present any obstruction, because the properties most at risk would probably be theirs from any blockage or detritus. So there will be a management plan secured by way of condition, which will set out some more of the details, but the principles are ones being outlined within their application documents.
Thank you, David. We now move to the general debate. Can I quickly kick off? As a proud South Bristolian, some of us still look to West Street, Bedminster as a high street. We're all aware of the problems afflicting high streets during COVID, but I suspect the decline of East Street goes back to the 70s and the movement of Wills to Hartcliffe, of course. And there are significant other issues, of course, which have contributed to this. So I welcome the fact we need to urgently to look at regeneration and restoring prosperity there. Realistically, I would agree that we had 5 rival schemes on different plots which it didn't have a common identity. So I welcome the fact we had the framework document the other year. In my view, that helps a lot to obviously frame and give a policy context to this bid. I would agree with certain concerned residents that if this was a scheme for the overall Bedminster Green area, I would be concerned that it was student-led, but the fact it's only one of the responses to what I believe to be a more considered general regeneration scheme is welcome. I believe the policy context is supported, so I don't see a concern there. With regard to the height and bulk of the buildings, obviously we need to look carefully about overshadowing and possible loss of sunlight. I believe the evidence shows that there's a very minor loss of sunlight, so this doesn't seem to be a persuasive argument to vote against this. Finally, I think this has great environmental boost and arguments for it. Clearly, the river or the stream Malago is going to be enhanced. Also, we're going to have BREEAM excellent buildings, which is great news linked to a local heat energy system. The living roofs and the sustainable transport are all positive improvements, of course, and the fact it's almost zero car-led has got to be a positive factor. My one, not hesitation, but was raised at the briefing the other week. Among the various funded Section 106 transport improvements is a RPZ for Windmill Hill, and I do appreciate that people who want this may fear it may be lost in the long grass. So whilst I don't believe we can condition it, we could actually add a request to Cabinet to actually fast track that, make sure that that's actually implemented ASAP. But on that basis, I'm happy to support the scheme. Are there other speakers? Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you've been unusually verbose today, but you've captured all my most of my points. But yeah, excellent news for East Street. Desperately needs the footfall. You can't get away from that. You need more people there for that street to be profitable. Environmentally, you're getting rid of a car park and replacing it with a positive, net positive biodiversity. That's great. A heat network connection, and opening up the river. There's so much really good about it, and I will certainly be voting for it. I pay tribute to David. Actually, has worked very, very hard on this whole, both this application and the framework, and Councillor Nicola Beach as well. This framework now seems to be bearing fruit, which I think is great.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to reiterate what Councillor Alexander just said, thanking Dave and his team for a massive piece of work. Also, I want to thank the local residents and groups who've made comments, and particularly those who came in today to speak to us directly. Very nerve-wracking experiences, I know, in my former life. I do note that a high number of comments have been in opposition to the scheme, and I do share some of those concerns, principally the height, scale and massing, the architectural design, and also impact on local services such as GPs and dentists. However, I do like the public realm improvements, especially the linear park alongside the Malago. That's going to be a fantastic bonus to the local community. I also like the improvements in active and sustainable transport. It's a development of a brownfield site as opposed to a greenfield site, so that obviously has to be applauded. And I also appreciate the fact the developer has responded to feedback and made amendments to the scheme. Unfortunately, I do think that the scale and massing of the scheme is still an issue, and I appreciate your point about, so I forgot your name, sorry. I appreciate Tom's point about the finger design of the building. It doesn't really work unless you're looking directly onto it. So from most angles, the buildings just appear to be a huge monolithic block. I'm in principle, I'm opposed to high buildings. buildings unless they're of considerable architectural merit. And no offence to the architect, I'm sure his brief was quite restrictive, or her brief, but I don't think this building is of great architectural merit. However, I do accept the findings of the planning officer's report in terms of economic gain, the housing gain, the socio-economic gain, the cultural gain of having so many students in the area spending their money, the biodiversity gain, the active travel gain. But I'm still very conflicted because I just don't know if I want to put my name to a development which I just think is really unattractive, especially when viewed from Victoria Park and Windmill Hill. But, I can see there are lots and lots of benefits too. So I'm sort of leaning towards abstaining unless other members can persuade me otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I share Andrew's concerns about the building. No offence to the architect, but I find it distinctly underwhelming, both buildings. I'm also concerned that, frankly, there is nothing about this proposal that says you are in Bedminster, let alone that you are adjacent to the Bedminster Conservation Area. Bedminster has very strong characteristics, and I feel this was an opportunity to produce something that reinforced the heritage that makes up this important part of Bedminster, because I'm a very proud South Bristolian. I also have concerns about the number of student beds in one location. I think there's an opportunity to spread that out across different developments rather than putting all eggs into one basket. And also I appreciate Gary's comments about the wider development. I still have concerns about some safety elements within this particular development that we are being asked to consider. The opening up the Malago River is very much a positive, although I understand that is a key element of the Bedminster framework. So whichever proposal comes forward to this site would need to include that within it. And I understand that most of the funding for that is coming from strategic sale in any case. So that can still happen. I have to say I am leaning towards voting against this development, simply because I think we can do so much better for Bedminster. Thank you.
Ed?
I'd like to echo that. I think I'd like to thank officers for their hard work. I think the work they've done on the framework and the strategic seal is excellent. But I think many of the environmental benefits, the river, the sustainable transport and the public realm would accrue anyway because it's part of the framework. And so I think we probably need to I would like to see us revisit the viability assessment to see if we could make this a smaller, less impactful development, but still get the public realm and other benefits. I think it's notable that the developer is saying that they've done a very collaborative approach to development, but in fact they consulted on something different, and when it's actually come to planning, they have it's quite a different scheme. And like I say, many of the benefits could be achieved with a smaller, less mass building. Obviously, we need to revisit the viability. I think the big concern is that this could be a catalyst for further development, but unsustainable and unsympathetic development to the local area. And I think we need to think very carefully about that. The fingers seem to be there for the occupants. The view through them really is there just is marginal, virtually not there at all, and will impact on local amenities. So I think the fingers are there to give enough daylight to the occupants. I can't get away from the fact that the planning inspector judged a very similar scheme on mass, height and density and scale to be really unacceptable, and didn't mince his words at all. And I think that is actually, we may need to revisit the Bedminster framework, green framework, because of that. Because if a planning inspector is saying that, then it does rather call into question the framework itself. I'm very concerned that a lot of the people have not supported this. They've not objected, but they've not supported and have quite considerable concerns about it. And in particular, too, I'd like to pull out would be the Business Improvement District, who supported every other
thing unconditionally, saying it will bring economic benefits, but have noted the height, scale and massing of this development is rather of concern. And the Civic Society said they supported the previous initial consultation, but they cannot support this one because of those same concerns. I cannot believe that Windmill Hill City Farm, which grows food and is an incredibly important local amenity, will not be affected by the light implications of this. And I think maybe this might be one place where we think about a more bespoke light assessment to see what the implications are, particularly concerning to hear that the light after midday will be gone altogether, the sunlight in the winter. And that is a massive concern if you're trying to grow food or anything like that. And given that so many professionals and interest groups have expressed concerns, but not actually come out in outright opposition, that gives me very big concerns. So I think that whilst I support the regeneration of this and it will support the local economy, the framework and the spatial plan around it is excellent work by officers. I do think we need to have a bit of a rethink about just the scale of the building, and particularly the number of students, and the fact that the student market will change because of COVID and because of the Brexit. And the way that this building is set out will not be future-proofed. If it changes, it cannot be repurposed for anything else other than students. All of those things are of grave concern, and I cannot really support this application as it stands, although I do approve in principle of some significant redevelopment on this site.
Thanks. Before moving to Chris, can I just stress, by law, this planning committee cannot redesign a planning scheme. We can actually consider it, approve it, reject it, but we're not able to actually redesign it. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with both sides. What people have said, there's good and bad on both sides, and I'm not 100% happy with some of the issues on it. But I think, in general, this is an area that really, really needs a lot of investment in it. I use East Street, North Street, West Street regularly, and this street is the worst one of more through Bedminster. And I think this development, although it's not perfect, I think it will enhance that area. I was concerned about the light from the City Farm because I use that myself with my grandchildren, but I feel more happy now that the officer have explained that to me, and I think the benefits far, far, far outweigh the negatives, so I will be supporting this application, Chair.
Are there any... Oh, John.
Yeah, I just want to add that I don't think any plan for this area is going to be absolutely perfect. And whilst on the face of it, I put my faith in all of the hard work of the planning team as the experts on this. And so really for me, what's tipped the scales in favour of this application is that I don't think the residents and businesses in High Street of Bedminster can afford any more delay on getting the regeneration in place. And then we've got all of the other benefits of the biodiversity, the environmental impacts, the cycling, etc.
Philippa.
Thank you. I do share some of the concerns about the massing and the appearance, but overall I support it, primarily because in Bristol we need more houses. There are people moving into Bristol from other parts of the UK. Whether or not, with or without Brexit, people are moving into this area. And if we can have really high quality student accommodation that is good for students and is also going to mean that will then improve that'll mean there'll be more room for family homes in other areas. I think that's really important. I don't know if that can be taken account of, but I think the high quality provision for students and the money that they'll bring into Bedminster, I think is really important.
Tom.
Thank you. I'd like to echo the comments from Ed, really, about the height and massing being the key issue here. Lots of local groups, as we've seen, have responded negatively to it, and even the ones that have responded neutrally have brought up the issue of height and massing. I don't think we do need to settle for less than perfect for Bedminster. I think this area has got really great potential, and we shouldn't be settling for what will amount to essentially a giant wall across the city, really. I support proposals for purpose-built student accommodation because I totally recognise that this is necessary for relieving housing pressure across the city, although we didn't really get into that figure about £5.3 million from students. Based on those numbers, it seems to suggest that students have a spending power of £6,500 each, which per year, which, you know, having recently been one, I can tell you isn't true. So yeah, at this moment in time, I can't support these proposals.
I think we've had a wide-ranging debate and every member has spoken. So I think we should make a decision now. Can I formally move the officer's recommendations to approve, subject to a request to Cabinet to look at prioritising the Windmill Hill RPZ, please? Is there a seconder? Don, thank you. I believe now Jeremy's going to conduct a name vote.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. So if I just read out each councillor's name, if you can just indicate how you were going to vote, for, against or abstain, and then at the end I'll just give the vote. So first of all, Councillor Don Alexander.
For.
Councillor Tony Dyer.
Against.
Councillor John Geeter.
For.
Councillor Tom Hathaway.
Against.
Councillor Philippa Hume.
For.
Councillor Chris Jackson.
For.
Councillor Ed Plowden.
Against.
Councillor Andrew Varney.
Abstain.
And Councillor Richard Eddy.
For.
So that's 5 in favour, 3 against and 1 abstention, Chair. That's correct.
May I thank members for their consideration. We'll now move on to the second item, Gloucester Road. Again, you will be aware we've received a number of written reports.
Excuse me, Chair. Can we just have 5 minutes? I need to
yes,
go
of
to
course.
the lavatory.
In that case, we'll start again shortly after 4:06.
Also, Chair, is there provision for water anywhere? We need to go down to offices, I guess, for that. Okay.
Could I suggest in future, Andrew, you bring your hip flask? The Tory group Right, I think we're all in place, so shall we recommence? We are now moving on to Gloucester Road. I've got two members, one councillor and one member of the public who wish to speak. Firstly, Jamie Piper, please.
Hello. The proposals will bring back into use a building which has remained vacant for many years and which, as well as detracting from the street scene, in no way contributes to the vitality or viability of Bishopston Centre. We've worked closely with your officers to address all issues raised, and it is pleasing to note that they are now fully supportive of the proposals. A number of objections to this application focus on locals not wanting a large chain at this location. However, aside from this not being a material planning consideration, it should be noted that due to the size of the unit and the level of investment required to bring it back into use, it is inevitable that only a company of a certain size would take this building on. It is therefore respectfully requested that the application is viewed as an opportunity to bring about long overdue positive change to this building, securing significant investment within the local area at a time when public houses are frequently closing, as well as creating circa 50 full and part-time job opportunities, together with indirect employment by attracting people to the local area who will undertake link trips with other facilities. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
So I'm here representing the residents of Bishopston and Ashley Down, but specifically the residents who live behind where the property is. As you can tell, there is a big, strong feeling about this. There's been many objections in the past. There's been lots of planning applications put in and rejected. There are some for it as well. But since the letter came round last week, I have been inundated with emails, people quite panicking that this is going ahead. The two main areas in particular are the area just behind Britton Avenue, where they're already having quite a lot of problems with the Merton Road industrial estate and a lot of noise and a lot of antisocial behaviour. And the thought of another pub adding to this is really quite worrying to them. And the other group that are concerned are those who live near the cricket ground. So the cricket ground is also getting more and more popular as a social venue. There's a lot more drinking, and the idea that a cheaper pub, which has all-day drinking, is going to be there is making a concern about antisocial behaviour and drinking and noise in particular. There's also a concern that it's right by a bus stop. While they're going to be closing the terrace at 9 o'clock, if people are going outside for a cigarette, they're going to be congregating around the bus stop and around the pavement, causing a lot of congestion. So there's not a lot of love for this proposal in the local area. So I wanted to represent them today.
Hello, good afternoon all. My name's David. I've been dealing with the applications in relation to this site since about 2017, so it's been some time now. In that period, we've had, this is the third application since 2017. One was refused, one was withdrawn, and then we've got this application that's now, which has been with the council since around this time last year. It's been quite a journey to get to this point. However, we're now at the point where we can present the application for consideration before a planning committee. So I'm going to run you through the proposals in a bit more detail now. So, as you're probably aware, the site is 349 Gloucester Road, Bishopston and Ward. The site is located to the eastern side of Gloucester Road. It's just north of the Neville Road, Longmead Avenue junction, and just south of the Ashley Down Road junction. So this is the image of the building itself. It's a disused commercial building which has been vacant since at least 2008, possibly before this, but as far as the local planning authority is aware, it's been vacant since at least 2008. The building was constructed in the early 1960s, originally built as a supermarket, but has generally been used for retail purposes in recent times. Following changes to the way that commercial buildings are classified in the planning system made by the government last year, falls into use class E, which is quite a wide use class. It includes retail, so this building was formerly a retail building, so it includes retail, but it also includes cafe restaurant use, office use, potential use as a gym or health centre use. So there's quite a wide gamut of potential uses that the building could be used for without a further application for planning permission. So these are some photos of the interior of the building. You can see it's essentially just a commercial shell, concrete floor, and fairly bare bones construction. It needs quite a bit of work to return it to active use. So this is an aerial image of the site itself. We're looking eastwards towards the sort of residential area to the east of Gloucester Road. You can see that the building is 2 stories in parts. So the front part of the building is 2 stories, and then the part on the northern side is also 2 stories. But that main part of the building behind the front part is a single story with a flat roof. The building includes a shop front to Gloucester Road, but this has been boarded up due to disuse. The neighbouring sites to the north and south are in use as a betting shop with a flat above, and then at the back of this there's a reclamation yard and antique reclaimed furniture dealer, and then to the northern side of the site there's a hobby and craft shop, which again has a flat above it. The area to the rear of the site is the Merton Road estate. Essentially, this isn't a formal trading estate, but it's an area of commercial industrial buildings. The use right at the back of the site is MOT car repair garage. So you can see some of the cars and vehicles associated with that in the image at the back there. And then you've got the Co-op supermarket to the south of the site, so the right-hand side of the picture there. This image is taken from the first floor of the building, looking out over that single-story flat roof area. You can see the 2-story part of the building on the right side of the image at the front there. There's a flat located above the shop, the betting shop to the south there in the foreground. And you've got the Co-op supermarket in the middle of this image. And then to the rear, you can see some of the roofs of the commercial industrial buildings on the Merton Road area. And at the very back of those there, we've got the terraced houses on Brinland Avenue in the rear of the image. So the site is located in the Gloucester Road town centre. This is a designated town centre designated by policy BCS 7 of the core strategy. It also forms part of the primary shopping area, which is again designated by policy DM8 of the local plan. You can see the town centre area follows the layout of Gloucester Road, so it's a narrow strip following Gloucester Road, and the site is within the primary shopping area designation. So the application and development that we're considering here today is an application for change of use of the building from its former retail or commercial use to a public house. So the development involves change of use primarily, but also some associated works to the building. These would include 2 small extensions. One would be located at ground floor level to the northern side of the building, and a second would be located at first floor level just behind the rear of the front part of the building. The proposals include complete refurbishment of the building, so all external walls would be refurbished and made good, so they would use existing materials just to modernise the exterior of the building. They're proposing to install completely new windows and doors in the building as well. The internal layout would be adjusted to create seating areas for customers. They're also proposing to create a kitchen in there as well, customer toilets and staff facilities such as a staff room as well. There's also proposed to be an outdoor area located at first floor level. So that would be for outdoor drinking and dining, and because of its position at first floor level, it's essentially a roof terrace, that's the way I'll refer to it in the wider report. The application also seeks permission for installation of plant and equipment relating to the kitchen extraction system and for refrigeration purposes, heating and cooling, and solar panels and air source heat pumps, which should also be installed on the roof of the building. So just to run you through the layouts a little bit, you can see on the left side of this image, we've got Gloucester Road at the front here. There's two main entrances for customers, one directly from Gloucester Road, and then a secondary one created in a courtyard area to the northern side of the site. You can see there's a staircase in the middle of the building there, which would take people up to first floor level. There's also a lift proposed as well within the site. Service entrances are at the far northern side, so the long corridor at the northern side at the top of this plan, and also at the far southern side, so the bottom of this plan. Those two long corridors are service entrances to get to the bin store, but also to the kitchen and the cold store for drinks, etc. So this is the proposed first floor layout plan. The area where the staircase is, roughly centrally, that is the proposed first floor extension. It's a fairly small scale extension in the grand scheme of the building. You can see the wider layout is generally seats and tables for customers to sit at. The area in the center of the image there, you can see some doors leading out to an area which would be the roof terrace area. That would be enclosed by walls to the south and to the east side. The wall on the east side would be a plant enclosure for condenser units related to the operations of the building, and the wall to the south would be a more traditional wall to enclose that roof terrace area. So this is a visualization of how the building would look following refurbishment from the front on Gloucester Road. You can see the main entrance in the middle of the picture, the service entrance at the right-hand side of the picture, the secondary entrance at the far left side of the picture, the new windows and lighting installed as well. This is a visual of the roof area when it would be completed. You can see the general layout of seating and lighting and the walled areas enclosing that outdoor roof terrace area. So as we've already heard somewhat, the application returned quite wide public consultation. We received a total of 241 objections and 59 comments in support. So generally a negative response, but some support for the proposals as well. As we've heard, one of the themes of objection was in relation to the sort of identity of the applicant, but the issue with this was, obviously we can personally understand those concerns. This issue is not a material consideration. The application must be assessed in land use terms, so as a public house rather than as a specific business. So we have to consider it as a generic public house rather than a particular type of public house. Further concerns relate to noise pollution related to the development. So that was definitely a major concern of residents, both from the flats adjacent to the north and south of the site, but also the properties to the rear of the site, beyond the commercial buildings on Merton Road. Quite a lot of objection from those properties and from further afield as well. So other concerns relate to the parking impacts of the proposal. So the development doesn't include any on-site car parking, and there's concerns that vehicles associated with people accessing the site would cause highways safety issues on local roads. Concerns have also been raised in relation to the public health implications of a public house in relation to the sale of alcohol, essentially, is the main concern there. Comments in support, generally the key themes of these relate to bringing a vacant building back into use. People support the jobs associated with the proposal, and some residents have also acknowledged the fact that other pubs have recently closed on Gloucester Road, so this pub would compensate for that. So turning to the assessment of officers, the first issue which comes up when we're considering this application is in relation to the use itself, the change of use, the loss of the existing retail use, and the proposals to create a public house. So to start with, in planning policy terms, the Gloucester Road Town Centre does represent an acceptable and policy compliant location for a pub. National planning policy designates main town centre uses, and pubs, restaurants, cafes, bars, those sorts of uses are uses which are supported in town centre locations, which Gloucester Road is designated. So this is the sort of use that you would expect to find in this area, and planning policy supports that use in this area. One of the key reasons for this use being acceptable in this area is the accessibility benefits. So Gloucester Road has very good public transport options, so be easy for customers and staff alike to access the site via sustainable and low carbon modes. So that's a benefit of the proposals, and is a reason that the site is acceptable for this use. So the planning policy in town centres and primary shopping areas is generally a bit more flexible now than it has been in the past, particularly due to the introduction of Class E, means that local planning authorities have less control over the retail function of the area. Nevertheless, the local planning authority does feel that this proposal, particularly given the amount of time that the building has not been used for retail purposes, this proposal wouldn't be harmful to the shopping function of the area. It's noted that following development, following change of use, under 4% of the commercial uses in this section of the primary shopping area would be public houses. So it's a fairly minor proportion of the overall commercial businesses in the area. So in terms of wider benefits, the building has not contributed positively to the shopping area or the town centre for quite a while now, and it's found that reuse of the building and refurbishment of the building would be positive for the shopping area in terms of attracting more people to the area. It's also noted that the proposals would create 50 full and part-time jobs, so a range of full and part-time jobs, which would benefit local employment, and also the proposals would hold some benefit for the local economy as well. It's noted that with the previous applications that we've dealt with, the application that was refused in 2017, 2018, the principle of development, the change of use, and the acceptability of a public house at this site was not a reason for refusal. So the local planning authority has previously set out its position on this and generally finds that this proposal on balance would be acceptable at this site. So turning to the distribution of pubs within the local area. So this is a criteria for local proposals for food and drink outlets. There's a need to have a good mix of different uses within the shopping area and not have an oversaturation of one particular use. You can see from this map that there's two pubs to the north and south of the site, the Royal Oak at the junction with Ashley Down Road, and the Anchor pub to the south of the Co-op and the car wash there. These two pubs are the closest to. Then further south, you've got a closed pub, which is now being used as a restaurant, the Old Fox. So that closed in the last 5 years or so. Further south beyond that, you've got the Golden Lion. So on that stretch of Gloucester Road, you've got three existing pubs. This would be a fourth. As I mentioned in the previous section, it's not found to be a disproportionate quantity for this section of the street. The public houses would be pretty well spaced out. There'd be a good few hundred meters between each pub, and it wouldn't lead to a sort of over-proliferation as discouraged by policy. There are wider public houses in the wider area, but these aren't sort of in the town centre itself, so don't influence this assessment. So turning to the second key issue, this is the impact to amenity of neighbouring properties. The current application has been revised over the previous submission, which was refused on this ground. It was refused on the basis of negative impact to neighbouring amenity. So the current proposals now seek planning permission to open the pub from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11:30 at night on Sunday to Thursday. And on Friday and Saturday, the public house would be open between 7 and midnight. So those opening hours have been brought in by an hour each over the previous application. Those opening hours are the same as the Anchor pub, which I mentioned in the previous section, 100 metres to the south, and are generally similar to other commercial uses in the town centre. So that was a sort of key consideration to improve the scheme. It's proposed that the roof terrace area will close at 9 p.m. daily. Again, many of the other commercial uses in the town centre are still running at this point in time, so this brings background noise levels up. It was found to be a sort of key consideration of the pollution control team that they would want that roof terrace to shut at a more reasonable closing time than the previous application, which was 11 p.m. So that's now changed. We've also got a site management plan where the applicant outlines a range of measures as to how they'll ensure the security of the site and manage the premises to ensure safe running of the pub. There's a range of measures, including security staff, measures in relation to when there'll be sporting events in the local area, so games at the Bristol Rovers football club, but also the county cricket ground as well. They'll have security staff on site on those days. The pub would be a home fans only pub on match days. There's no music proposed, so that's outlined in the site management plan. And there's a series of other measures which are outlined in the site management plan to manage the use and generally reduce the impacts and mitigate effects. So turning to another factor of noise, it'd be noise from the roof terrace itself. So during its operation, up until that 9 p.m. point, the applicant has prepared a noise impact assessment in relation to this use, and the noise impact assessment takes predicted levels for human voices and puts them against measurements that they've taken for the actual background noise levels surrounding the site. So various different locations picked to represent the nearest neighbouring properties. With all of these, the noise levels were lower than the World Health Organization's annoyance level for outdoor noise, so that's 50 decibels. So all of the predicted noise would be lower than this level, although it's actually noted that the actual background levels of the properties on Gloucester Road are higher than this level already, probably due to the traffic and the road noise. The noise level at the houses on Brynland Avenue, so the houses to the rear of the site, are actually quite low at the minute. So the actual background noise rating for that at that location was 40 decibels. It's predicted that the noise from the roof terrace up till 9 p.m. would be at 42 decibels. So there might be some audible impact outdoors in the rear gardens of those properties. but this has been assessed at 2 decibels above background noise level, which is a very minor level, and it's not found that that exceedance would cause significant harm to the amenity of those properties. So that's been reviewed by the pollution control team at the council, and they've deemed the predicted noise levels from the development as outlined in the noise impact assessment to be acceptable. So the noise impact assessment also considers noise from plant and equipment as part of the development, so that would be the kitchen extract system, the kitchen fans, and also the refrigeration plant and condenser units. In all cases, the noise from these plant and equipment would be below the existing background levels. So essentially that's deemed acceptable. Mitigation, acoustic dampening and housings are proposed to reduce noise to that level, but that's been deemed sound by the pollution control team, who have reviewed the impact assessment and agreed with the methodology and conclusions. So to summarise, we believe we now have sufficient information to allay our concerns in relation to impact to neighbouring properties. We feel that the noise impact has been mitigated to acceptable levels. We have suggested safeguarding conditions so that we can make sure that this will be secured in perpetuity. It's suggested that the actual noise levels as stipulated in the noise impact assessment are secured by condition, so that would be measurable if it was found that the use was particularly noisy at any point in time. The pollution control team could go out and measure the noise levels, and if they were above the noise levels as stated in the noise impact assessment, the applicant would need to do something about that to resolve that situation. It's also proposed that the opening hours are limited as suggested. The capacity of the roof terrace is limited to 130 customers at any one time. There's also restrictions on various other things like bin collection and emptying of bins at particular hours of days to make sure that those noise impacts don't affect neighbours. But the key summary is that we've now seen enough information to resolve all concerns in relation to impact to neighbouring properties. In relation to other planning issues that result from planning policy, in relation to the design, appearance and character, the existing building at the site is obviously not really contributing positively to the area at present. It's been disused. It's a fairly neutral building anyway. It's a functional design. The proposals to refurbish that and make good the existing building are all deemed to be in keeping with the existing character and appearance. The proposals to replace the windows would use high quality materials, and it's proposed to have an active frontage in there with good public surveillance over the street, which again is something that's encouraged in town centre and shopping areas. So in design terms, the proposal is supported. In terms of transport and highways impacts, highways have raised no objection following review of the scheme. Again, it's in a town centre, so it's a very accessible location. They've suggested a condition to secure a travel plan in relation to staff accessing the site, so to encourage staff to access via sustainable modes, and that would be associated with a monitoring fee as well, which would be sought via legal agreement. So that's in the recommendation to members for consideration. They've also recommended a delivery and service strategy to ensure that deliveries and servicing is undertaken at appropriate times. There is existing loading restrictions on Gloucester Road which prevent loading out at peak hours, so peak, the times that the roads are busiest in the mornings and the evenings, and the delivery and servicing strategy would be expected to outline proposals for delivery and servicing outside of those times. We've also got proposals for cycle parking on there as well in accordance with policy requirements. So there is 6 customer cycle parking spaces, also 6 staff cycling parking spaces, which accords with policy requirements and should encourage users to access the site via bike, which would be positive. Turning to energy and sustainability, the proposals include on-site renewable energy generation in the form of air source heat pumps, which would generate heating for the development, heating and cooling, and also solar panels which would generate electricity for use on site. These renewable energy sources would reduce carbon emissions of the development by 27%, which exceeds the policy requirement. And the proposals are also required to be BREEAM Excellent compliant as well. That's outlined within the sustainability statement and will be secured by condition. So the building would be constructed to very energy efficient and sustainable means. I'd like to draw members' attention to a slight error which was made in the report. The SIL calculation, which was put in the report, used the wrong use, so it used the retail use, so the calculation is not correct. I'd like to just clarify that the actual SIL liability of development is not £212,000, it's £88,000. So the SIL payment that would be generated would be £88,527 if permission were to be granted. So turning to the officer recommendation, as you've heard, officers are now satisfied that the issues that resulted in the refusal of the previous applications have been successfully resolved. In officers' view, the proposals are broadly positive for the area in terms of bringing a disused building back into use. A lot of investment in terms of refurbishment and modernisation, as well as creating jobs and stimulating the economy. The impacts of the development and the use are found to can be suitably managed via conditions. So the application is deemed in accordance with all relevant local and national policy. The officer's recommendation to committee is therefore that permission should be granted, subject to the legal agreement for the travel plan monitoring fee and conditions. So that concludes the officer's presentation.
Any questions for David? Tony.
Thank you, David. You highlighted that there were a number of other pubs within the area. Do any of those have similar roof terraces to the one proposed for this venue?
So the Anchor pub has a garden area to the rear, which is also required to close at 9 p.m. So the roof terrace would accord with that. That roof terrace is actually closer to the properties at the back. If I just get up a map of the site here, you can see the Anchor pub is the PH at the bottom of the screen there, number 321 Gloucester Road. The area inset at the rear of that is the garden at the back, and it backs directly onto the gardens behind, so that's a much closer relationship there. Essentially, this roof terrace would be further away from the neighbouring properties, quite a bit further away, but would be required to close at the same time. So that was our thinking there. I believe the Royal Oak pub further up also has some outdoor facilities. Most pubs these days want those facilities for smoking and things. So,
Tom.
Thank you for the report, David. I might have missed this in the report, but it mentions that the capacity of the roof terrace is 130 patrons. But what is the total capacity of customers? Like, if the pub were full, how many people would be in it? And additionally, it mentions data supplied by the client, which shows in other venues there's a steady decrease in customers towards the end of the night. But were any of the venues used for that data? Did any of them have a similar sort of area that was being closed at 9 o'clock? And if not, how might that affect those numbers?
In relation to capacity limits, the noise impact assessment suggests it includes a figure of 850, which is suggested to be the maximum trading capacity of the building. That is suggested to be the absolute maximum, and it's only expected to be achieved on a small number of days per year. Looking at the seating layouts and things, there definitely are not seats in the building in the layout plans shown to accommodate 850 people. So I would imagine that at the vast majority of times the operating capacity would be lower than that. I think that's the maximum capacity that they're looking for. But from our perspective, that wasn't found to be a major issue. What was the, sorry, just clarify the second part of the question.
The second question relates to the dispersal of customers towards the end of the night, and that they provided data that suggests it's sort of a steady decline. But were any of the data provided, was that from venues which had a similar area that they closed at 9 o'clock, or would you expect that data to be, you know, not valid for this case?
So essentially, that data that was provided by the applicant was quite unusual in that they do have other public houses in the city and the surroundings, and they are able to provide that sort of information. We didn't rely on that too heavily in our assessment. I think the nearest similar pub that is owned by the applicant is the one on White Ladies Road. My knowledge of that pub is not amazing, but I would suggest it does have an outside area, perhaps to the front, but I don't know about any restrictions about requiring that to close. But the trading figures were that example, that pub was used as the most direct comparison that we had, and we found that the sales were probably likely to be comparable to that site, so that's why that was mentioned.
Philippa?
Thank you. I'm just asking about noise as well, because that's something that so many people are concerned about locally, according to the complaints. So my question is, first of all, I read on page 155 that the noise assessment was done on average sound levels for a human voice, and I wonder if that takes into account people who've been drinking average levels of a human voice, which is perhaps different. And also, I wonder if there's precedence for other venues successfully enforcing noise mitigation measures. For example, asking people to to make sure that the roof terrace actually has no people on it at 9 o'clock, whether they can successfully take action against people who are causing excessive noise in reality.
So the condition requiring closure of the roof terrace, I think if we had reports that they were using the roof terrace beyond that time, we could enforce that in that we could serve a breach of condition notice and require that they make sure that they close at the right time. So we could enforce that. What was the original part of the question? Sorry.
Just it said that they based the sound assessment on average sound levels for human voices, which I'm just wondering if that's the same when people have had a few drinks.
In all honesty, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether or not the impact assessment takes account for that. Sorry, I can't answer that.
Just to be helpful, David, obviously planning enforcement may have a role here. Most of the control is exercised by licensing functions. We could actually review a license based upon that or similar complaints by management, of course, and even revoke it if they're found to be at fault. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, David. Just a quick question about the previous planning applications that were refused. Was that, so you mentioned that was because of the opening hours, and I think also cycling, or lack of cycling provision. Were there any other reasons for those previous applications being refused? Thank you.
So I think the two other reasons for refusal with the previous refused application related to design of the building. There was some aspects of the alterations which we weren't quite happy with. They were proposing a cafe along the pavement on Gloucester Road, which would have been screened with opaque glass that we didn't feel achieved that active frontage that we were looking for in the shopping area, and some of the materials that were used for the extensions and roof level alterations weren't to the sort of quality of the existing building. So those aspects have been revised. We're now happy with those. The other reason for refusal related to site management. So kind of site management and public safety, we were concerned about that whether or not the applicant had really thought in a lot of detail about how the site would be managed in relation to those events taking place in the local area. There wasn't a site management plan with the previous application, so that information was not present. But we now do have that. They've now got the security proposals on match days, the home fans only proposals, so we're essentially satisfied. But as the chair mentioned, that would also be something that would be covered by licensing as well.
Ed?
It's great to see that the management plan is proposed to be a condition. I notice a potential loophole that it says that the plan will be reviewed by the manager and may be altered, and I'd like to make sure that the planning condition ensures that there's no sort of lessening of its own management plan, because it puts it in the hands of the applicant, which I don't think is right. And I think it would be great if we could also, the complaints policy states that it will go to the manager and then regional manager. I think it would be good if there would be an open book with the planning authority on those complaints, so that we can monitor levels of complaints and how satisfactorily they've been dealt with. And the other big concern, my question, I guess, is can that be done? Can that be conditioned? The other question is, what kind of conditions can we put on the pavement, on the frontage? Because it looks like a lot of people will spill out to smoke cigarettes and so on directly outside. And I don't think the CCTV system recommended by the police will necessarily actually be allowed to monitor the public realm. So could there be a condition to make sure that there's some form of public monitoring via CCTV of the public realm outside this, to ensure that good behaviour prevails?
Since there seems to be a wee delay in the response, I'll just respond to the 2 points that I believe I have the answers to. You asked about responsibility for coming up with the management plan. I think that's always in the hands of the applicant or the owner, but it then has to be judged against our policies, of course. Am I correct, David?
So we would expect the management plan to be maintained in perpetuity. So any clause that says that the applicant can divert from that, the condition requires it to be maintained in perpetuity, and that would be the version that was approved at planning stage, not a subsequent variation of that.
And I would also say, perhaps David wants to add to this, but regard to your concern of people going outside, I believe that would normally be enforced by licensing, of course, and would be covered by the license they've received.
Yeah, we would definitely expect that the CCTV would cover the entrances to the building, certainly. There is a condition on there requiring submission of the CCTV system, which we would consult the police force on. So we'd make sure that they were happy before we signed that off.
Right, can I suggest we move to the debate now? If I kick off, I'll be a lot more concise for Don. It seems to me this boils down to 3 questions. Firstly, is the case made for a change of use? Well, we've heard it's been vacant for 15 years and they can have planning permission to actually do a lot of other things, although not for this use. So in my view, the case is made. Secondly, is there an over-concentration of pubs in that part of Gloucester Road? Well, I believe we've heard there's not, based on the evidence we've had. Lastly, do we believe granting this would actually imperil the residential amenity of the neighbours, other than provided and safeguarded by licensing? I don't believe there is, so on that basis I'll be voting in favour.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with what you say. I can't see any issue with it. I know that building very well. It's been looking really shabby for a long time. I don't think it's going to impair on other public houses or eateries or drinkers. And I think it will, as you said, that licensing is the people that will need to keep an eye on that. You've got the CCTV camera, you've got the management plan. I will be voting for this one, Chair.
Tom.
Thank you, Chair. My main concerns with the proposal centre on its proposed use, really, and the dependency on quite a long list of rules being followed to mitigate any impact on the community. It's obviously unfortunate that we're not able to take into account the very checkered reputation of the client, particularly around the treatment of workers, but I'm glad the proposals have addressed the issues with the previous applications around design, transport and sustainability, and providing the management plan and conditions are strictly adhered to. I feel I can support the proposal.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the site has been largely derelict for 15 years. It's high time it is brought back into use. I'm really pleased the existing building is going to be repurposed rather than demolished, from an environmental sustainability point of view. I note the high number of public comments, mostly objecting. However, many of those objections are not of material consideration, much as we wish they might be, they're not. I accept the recommendations of the officer's report. Thank you very much, David, for compiling that report, all the work you've done on that. And yeah, I will be supporting this proposal.
Thanks, Andrew. I don't see any other speakers, so could I move the officer's recommendations that we approve the application? Chris, thank you. And Jeremy, if you could do a name bit, please.
Yes, certainly, Chair. So, as before, just indicate for, against, or abstain, please. Don Alexander.
For.
Tony Dyer.
For.
John Geeter.
For.
Tom Hathaway.
For.
Philippa Hume.
Abstain.
Chris Jackson.
For.
Ed Plowden.
For.
Andrew Varney.
For.
And Richard Eddy. So that's 8 for and 1 abstention. It's carried, Chair.
So we've got a number of public forums. I've got Dr. Jonathan French first. Is he there? All right. Yeah, please. No. In fact, forward. Thanks. We've read your statement before, so if you could just summarise it in 60 seconds, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. John French, and I live in the Coach House opposite the proposed development. I'm disappointed at the number of errors in the planning report. This is an application to develop a residential garden. The pre-existing new-style properties in the area were built on brownfield sites of factories and workshops. The current proposal would set an entirely new precedent for the development of gardens in this area. It represents all of the threats to the conservation area highlighted previously by Zoe Wilcox in the character appraisal, who I believe might be here today. Had the officer who wrote the report visited the site, they would have seen that there is no space for demolition, scaffolding, parking, loading, unloading outside the site without blocking this single lane for the 19 households that use it, including 5 NHS workers. Larger vehicles are frequently blocked already. There is no space for lorries to turn, and so they have to reverse down the lane, which has resulted in near misses with children playing. On a personal note, the front window looks straight into our bedroom. The privacy screen is not acceptable as it could easily be removed under the guise of cleaning or maintenance, with overlooking where it's least wanted. Finally, adding a storey to the height of the building will block the light to our house and the light to the neighbouring gardens. I ask the Council now to protect the conservation area,
safeguard the community's physical and mental well-being by rejecting this application and the precedent it would set to develop the gardens that back onto this narrow lane.
Thank you. Jane Valentine, please.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Jane Valentine. I live at 25 Elliston Road on the corner of Clyde Lane, so about 20 yards from the property. Before I read my own 1-minute statement, another resident was very keen to come today and has been called away. Would you also allow me to read his 1-minute statement, Chair?
Is it Ian Tidmarsh?
That's the
we were advised he wouldn't be here, but members have read it in advance, so I think if you just want to summarise your plea, please.
I will, thank you. Okay. The residents' comments provided in the report do not reflect valuable local knowledge and expert assessments which confirm the building will harm the conservation area. The officer has assessed the character of the location incorrectly and has not registered that Clyde Mews is separate to Clyde Lane. As Jonathan has said, the properties on Clyde Mews replace an old builder's yard and a derelict printworks. None of these properties have been built on garden land, and no Mews houses exist in Clyde Lane. Space-wise, this property will be the equivalent of yet another 2-bedroom flat in an LSOA which is 77% flat to 22% houses. It would be located in a 150-metre corner of Cotton, already home to 90 residents, the majority in flats and HMOs. This application goes against the national momentum for urban green space and conflicts with the efforts of a community passionate about preserving this heritage area for the enjoyment of everyone, today and in the future. I urge the committee not to set a precedent that allows garden land to be built on in Clyde Lane and the wider conservation area. Please either visit this site in person before making your decision or refuse this application. Thank you.
Tom Gilks, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Gilks and I live with my family in the adjoining property, number 5, Clyde Park. It's deeply concerning that the officer's report appears to have entirely ignored a careful appraisal by the expert heritage architect, Andrew Foyle, who gives clear conservation policy reasons why the application should be refused. I'd appeal to the committee to read this assessment. The officer's report speaks of Mews developments having been established in the gardens. However, no dwellings have so far been built in the gardens of Clyde Park properties, nor have they been historically. Additionally, the officer's report does not even reference the planning assessment of expert planning consultant David Glasson, which sets out reasons why this development should not proceed. On a personal note, we're deeply concerned the officer's report makes no reference to loss of amenity to us at 5 Clyde Park. It will have a significant impact on our home, with the end of our neighbour's garden being replaced by a 2-storey building which will massively overshadow our garden. There are also 3 triple roof light windows that will overlook our garden. The first floor window at one end will look directly into our property. It will feel like a direct invasion of our privacy, and in return we will have unavoidable awkward views into the proposed development. So before making your decision, I would kindly urge the committee to undertake a site visit to understand the impact this building will have on the area and the precedent it sets. Thank you.
I have Paul Wadsley next. Paul? No. There was some doubt he'd be here, so Simon Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to add further to my statement that in the short term, this proposed property will be occupied by the existing family members to cater for their ongoing needs and support, and who want to stay in Clyde Park, in the Clyde Park area. The existing garage will be soon be replaced anyway, and this may cause a similar disruption to that of the proposed bill. And finally, just to confirm, this is a family-driven project, financed by the family, for a family that has lived in Clyde Park for over 50 years. Thank you.
Councillor Portney.
Thank you very much, Chair, Committee. I'm here today to represent the residents of Cotton, and Cotton, and this part of it in particular, has a serious problem with an excessive concentration of small properties It's been caused by a subdivision of houses into flats. It's been caused by conversion of houses into HMOs. It's been caused by a lot of infill and garden development. And it's having a very severe impact in the local area, particularly around parking, waste issues, noise and overcrowding. And simply put, as the previous speaker said, it's caused the neighbourhood to just become unbalanced. The overwhelming majority of properties are now small and short-term let and for one or two people rather than family homes. To be honest, the number of family homes has gone off a cliff edge over the last few years. This development, simply put, further worsens that imbalance, adding yet another small property. There will never be an application in Cotton like the first big one that you saw today. This has happened by hundreds and hundreds of small applications like this one. This also threatens the conservation area specifically. The policy around the conservation area specifically notes the loss of trees, loss of gardens, volume of parking and the pressure on the public realm. This application worsens all of those issues. Simply put, residents are at the end of their tether with developers cramming more and more dwellings onto less and less space. This application does not meet the criteria for garden loss under policy DN21. It's harmful to the character of the area and the conservation area in particular under policy DN26. It does not help and actively damages the housing mix and contributes to an excessive concentration of small dwellings under policy BSC 18. I'm urging you in the strongest possible terms to reject this application. Thank you very much.
And finally, Martin Buckley.
Good afternoon. Just to say at the outset, I'm not an NIMBY. I appreciate we need more properties in Bristol. I live at 28 Woodfield Road. Now, that's nowhere on the plans, even though I'm probably the one most directly affected. It's actually my boundary wall that will be demolished. So I just want to just very quickly just go through why I think the actual plans are, let's say, incorrect, misleading. The property will be intrusive. I think the perspective and the height is wrong. The actual ground level at number 6, where this will take place, is actually higher than ours. I know they've said they're going to dig down 60 centimetres, but that's going to have no impact. The plans, conveniently again, don't include, we've got 7 windows, our lounge, our kitchen, 2 bedrooms overlooking this property. They're nowhere to be seen. They talk about overbearing and overshadowing, and it's, just nowhere to be seen on the plans. Apple trees and pear trees in my garden as well will be taken down. Again, not on the plans. The footprint for this property is just too small. And I know the accompanying papers talk about Clyde Mews. There's 6 houses there. I know it well. For my garden, the 6 houses on Clyde Mews back onto my property, it's fine, it's in the garden. The footprint is perfect for that place. However, with this one, the lane is so narrow, there will be no space. Well, obviously, they're talking about parking. In this post-COVID era, with us being blocked in constantly by vans, it's an accident waiting to happen. The doctor's already spoken about, Clyde Mews, where the doctor's on call. They will be blocked in. If they're blocked in for 2, 3, 4 minutes, who knows what's going to happen. I think another key thing, I did read through the reference about the traffic management as well. Clyde Mews and Clyde Lane, there is a blind spot there, which is causing real problems, as we said, reversing it, irrespective of all the noise pollution and the problems during the build. Once this is over, there will be an accident there because there are no turning circles. Clyde Mews has a turning circle, Clyde Lane will not. It is a difficult decision, look, I get it. But it's an oasis of calm around that area. It really is beautiful. I appreciate everyone on the committee don't have time to look at every application that comes through. But if we put this patchwork of Mews houses, because developers are going to pile in, if this is accepted, then everyone's going to be there. we will have lost that calm oasis of space. It does have an impact on neighbourhood well-being. Please, respectfully, please, say no to this decision. Thank you.
Right over to the officer for the report, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. So, as already mentioned, this application is for the demolition of an existing residential garage and the erection of a 2-bedroom, 2-storey mews house. The application property is located to the rear of number 6 Clyde Park, which is this property here, a substantial semi-detached property located in the Cottam and Redland Conservation Area. The application concerns a single-storey garage located at the bottom of the rear garden here, which fronts onto Clyde Lane, which then turns into Clyde Mews, and this is an adopted highway and is a no-through road. So this is the application site looking from the east, number 6 here, and this red hatched area is the application site. As already mentioned, the site fronts Clyde Lane here, which turns into the Clyde Mews. The Clyde Mews development here is a terrace of 2-storey coach houses constructed in the late 80s. And on the opposite side of the lane is the coach house, which was granted planning permission in 2009. Another property just to highlight is this property here, number 28 Woodfield Road, which is in residential use. So this is the application site looking from Clyde Lane, close to the corner with Clyde Mews. This is the application site here with garden space and the single-storey garage. And this is a closer view of the application site looking north up Clyde Lane, and this is the site here on the left. And this is another view of the application site from Clyde Lane, but from the opposite direction, looking south. So this is the application site here. And again, this is a similar view, but closer up, just showing that the junction between Clyde Lane when it turns into Clyde Mews, with the application site here on the right. And this is another view with the application site more or less directly behind us, looking towards the junction with Clyde Mews. And this is a closer view of the Clyde Mews development, which is just around the corner of the application site. So the application is for the demolition of the existing garage and construction of a new Mews property. So the property will be part single-storey and part 2-storey. This is the existing front elevation, showing the garage how it currently stands. And this is the proposed front elevation. So the dwelling will include a 2-storey element, which will be the same width as the existing garage, and will include a roof with a pitch which will closely resemble the existing garage. The 2-storey element will be a greater height than the existing garage, with an eaves height increasing by a metre, from 2.8 metres to 3.8 metres, and the ridge height will increase from 3.6 metres to approximately 5.3 metres. The 2-storey element will be faced in natural rubble stone with brick detailing. The first floor window will include a timber privacy screen, which I'll discuss a bit further later on. And the single-storey element will be faced in timber cladding and will have a flat green roof. The single-storey element will only be marginally taller than the existing boundary wall, so will be largely obscured from public view. And this is the proposed rear elevation, so there's similar materials and detailing to the front elevation, but there'll also be a window at first floor level. This is the proposed side elevation from the south. The roof will be constructed of clay tiles, and there'll be no windows located in the side elevations. Solar panels are proposed on the roof as shown. And this is the other side elevation from the north. This is the proposed ground floor plan. So the dwelling will be set back from the front boundary with a small front courtyard, which will include cycle storage and refuse storage. This will be independently accessible via a sliding gate. And to the rear of the site, there will be a larger external amenity area, which will include some retained trees alongside additional planting. This is the proposed first floor, which will include 2 bedrooms. So an initial round of public consultation generated objections from 24 surrounding neighbouring properties. Revised plans and additional detail was then requested by the applicant in order to address some of the concerns raised by residents and some concerns raised by officers. And the applicant agreed to the suggested revisions and provided revised plans, which are the ones that you've already just seen. And then following this, a further round of public consultation generated the same level of response, so objections from 24 neighbouring properties. So the main areas for concern, these are set out in detail in the report, and also they're all available to view in full online, but primarily the concern that the development would set an unwelcome precedent and would impact the character and appearance of the conservation area. Concerns that the loss of garden space and introduction of a dwelling is unacceptable in principle in this location. Concerns regarding impact on key views of St Saviour's Church, amenity impact on surrounding properties, so overlooking and overshadowing. Concerns regarding impact on parking, highway safety, concerns regarding bins, and potential impact on trees and ecology. So alongside these comments, objections have also been received from Councillor Lake and Councillor Pulteney. However, it should be noted the application hasn't been formally called in, so it comes before committee solely based on the level of objection. Councillor Lake was the previous councillor for Cotton Ward and raised concerns regarding aesthetics and impact on ecology. And Councillor Pulteney, who you've just heard from, is the newly elected member and raised a number of concerns, primarily the same issues that the residents have raised concern regarding. So I won't go into those again, however, I can go back to those if necessary. So with regards to the assessment, the principle of development, local and national planning policy promotes more sustainable patterns of development, including development on previously developed land, and as such the removal of the existing garage and introduction of residential development is supported in this respect, as the land has already been developed for the existing garage. It's also recognised that the development would result in the loss of some garden land, and the council does have a specific policy regarding this, which is policy DM21, and this policy states that residential development in place of private gardens will not be permitted unless the proposal would represent a more efficient use of land where higher densities are appropriate. And the supporting text to this policy identifies that high densities are appropriate in and around the city centre, in or close to other designated centres, and along or close to main public transport routes. So the application site in this instance is very close to the city centre and is only about 100 metres from the Chandos Road local centre to the south. So overall, officers are satisfied this is a sustainable location where higher densities are appropriate. It should also be noted that a significant amount of private garden land will be retained for number 6 Clyde Park. With regards to the principal, the application site is also located in an established mews setting where there are a number of existing small-scale mews properties, which some have already highlighted to you. As such, officers consider that there is already an existing precedent for this type of development in this part of the conservation area, and the acceptability of this type of development is reinforced and set out in the Cottam and Redland conservation area. So this is a direct quote from the character appraisal, which says that occasionally intimate streets of mews or cul-de-sacs are set behind the principal Victorian streets within the conservation area. Examples include Fremantle Lane, Gibson Road, Sydenham Lane, Clyde Lane and Elliston Lane. These are characterised by their smaller scale development, with the properties accessed via narrow routes and directly addressing the street, never higher than 2 stories. So you can see from that quote that Clyde Lane, which the application site will be located on, is directly referenced as an area characterised by this sort of development. So, with regards to urban design and the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, as already noted, the site is located in the Cottam and Redland conservation area, so there is a duty to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the area. And as already noted, the overall principle of mews development in this part of the conservation area is considered to be established, and the principle of removing the garage and introducing mews style development at the site is acceptable in principal design terms in this respect. Any development must, however, respond appropriately to the character and appearance of this part of the conservation area, and initial concerns were raised by officers regarding the scale, height, form and materials as originally proposed, and therefore in order to limit the visual impact, reduce the scale to an appropriate level and allow the development to more closely match the existing townscape, the applicant did provide revised plans with the height of the development reduced and the materials amended, which are the plans that you've already seen. It's accepted that the 2-storey element will be of a greater height than the existing garage. However, the total increase in height will not be overly significant, and the overall form of the 2-storey element will appear similar to the existing garage. The height of the 2-storey element, both the eaves height and the total ridge height, will also be consistent with that of surrounding mews properties within the lane. And the single-storey element will only be marginally taller than the existing boundary wall, which will be retained and therefore will not appear overly prominent or visible from public view. So it's recognised that some concerns have been raised that this development could set an unwelcome precedent for this sort of development in the conservation area. As already noted, officers are of the view that this sort of development and mews type dwellings have already been constructed in this setting, and the precedent is already there. And therefore, if any of the adjoining gardens did come forward for mews-style development, no objections would be raised in principle. However, any applications would be assessed on their individual merits and would need to be appropriate for the context and in keeping with surrounding properties and the character of the conservation area. And it's accepted that it may not be possible to achieve that on every site fronting Clyde Lane, and that's evident with a number of unsuccessful applications to construct a mews dwelling at the rear of number 3 Clyde Park, a few doors up. So there've been, I think, two unsuccessful applications there because officers have considered that the design and the impact would be harmful. So the two-storey element of the dwelling will be constructed of natural rubble stone with brick detailing, and will have a clay red roof. A number of surrounding properties have been constructed of similar materials, and they are clearly referenced in the conservation area character appraisal as being appropriate for this setting. So overall, following amendment, officers are satisfied that the overall design and scale of the new dwelling will appear subservient, traditional, and will be appropriate for the setting, and therefore it's the view of officers that the character and appearance of the conservation area will be preserved. And this conclusion was reached following consultation with the Council's City Design Group. So feedback was received from urban design and conservation officers, neither of which raised any objections to the proposal. So in relation to the amenity impact of the development, which includes overlooking, overshadowing and overbearing, the main properties which have been considered are the properties close to the main frontage building along Clyde Park, so numbers 4, 5, 6 along here. Number 28 Woodfield Road, which is this property here, and the coach house opposite. So with regards to the impact on Clyde Park, the proposed new dwelling will be sited approximately 18.8 metres away from these dwellings, so that's that separation distance there. This is a significant separation distance, and is sufficient to ensure that there will be no harmful overbearing or overshadowing impact. It's recognised that these properties do have rear windows which will face the new dwelling, and that the new dwelling will have a window in the first floor which will directly face these properties. However, the distance of 18.8 metres is substantial, and officers are satisfied that is sufficient to ensure that any overlooking would not be harmful. So the development would be built along the boundary of number 28 Woodfield Road, which is this property here, directly to the south of the application site. So this property does contain habitable rooms located approximately 13 metres from the boundary, alongside the conservatory, which is set back by approximately 6 metres. So following a request from the applicant, they agreed to provide a section through the site so that the amenity impact can be fully considered. So this section shows that the ground floor element of the proposed new dwelling, so this section here, will only be marginally taller than the existing boundary wall, and it's not considered that this increase in height would be significant enough to result in any harmful overbearing or overshadowing. The proposed two-storey element was reduced in scale following case officer advice, and will be set back from the boundary by approximately 3.8 metres. As such, the two-storey element will be sited approximately 10.2 metres from the rear conservatory of number 28, and approximately 16.5 metres from the rear elevation of the property itself. And from the sections, you can see that both of the conservatory and main dwelling windows will retain a 25-degree unobstructed vertical angle of the sky. So, given this, officers are overall satisfied that no harmful overbearing or overshadowing impact will arise. So the new dwelling will be sited on the opposite side of Clyde Lane to the coach house, so that's this property here. So the separation distance between the dwelling and the coach house across Clyde Lane will be approximately 8 metres. Whilst this is relatively close, this is typical of the distances found between developments of similar height on the opposite side of a tight urban Mews-style street such as this, and is typical of the existing separation distances between properties. The main concern regarding the amenity impact is the impact of any overlooking from the upper floor windows of the new development on these coach house windows on the opposite side of the lane. So again, the applicant has provided a section to show the relationship. As a whole, the separation distance across the lane and the siting of the development and the overall limited scale of the new property are such to allow officers to conclude that any overbearing or overshadowing would not be harmful. With regards to overlooking, in order to ensure that no harmful overlooking occurs, the scheme was amended during the course of the application to include a privacy screen to the first floor windows, which will include fixed blades with overlapping edges. And this privacy screen will ensure that the bedroom to the new property receives adequate light. However, outlook will be restricted down the lane towards Clyde Mews and away from neighbouring windows. Hopefully that is evident from the plans. And so following this amendment and subject to a condition which is attached to the recommendation that the privacy screen is installed and retained in perpetuity, officers are satisfied that there would be no harmful overlooking of the coach house. So another concern which is raised is the potential highway safety and transport issues. So the application has been reviewed by the Council's Transport Development Management Officers, and they raised no objections to the proposal, subject to conditions. Their comments are set out fully in the report, but just to touch on a few of the key things, the site is located in a residence parking scheme area, and it will be car-free, so there will be no dedicated off-street parking, which is acceptable in this sustainable area. And however, to ensure that residents are not eligible for parking permits in the future, an advice note is attached to the permission, which will ensure that future residents and visitors will be ineligible for permits, to ensure that there will be no increased pressure on local parking provision for existing residents in the area. Clyde Lane is a no-through road, which is subject to a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. So highways officers are satisfied and confirmed that there's very limited traffic in the local area along Clyde Lane, and which is overall a quiet and safe road, and where there's been no recorded accidents anywhere in the vicinity. So as such, no concerns were raised with regards to highway safety. With regards to the construction period and how that will be suitably managed to ensure no harm is caused for existing residents, a construction management plan is secured via condition. A refuse and recycling store is proposed within the front courtyard, which will be independently accessed. Collection operatives will then be able to access this store and then return the bins afterwards to ensure they're never left on the highway. And a policy-compliant cycle store is also proposed in the front courtyard. So a couple of other issues regarding potential impact on trees. So the council's arboricultural officers have reviewed the proposals and again raised no objections subject to conditions. So the development will require the removal of 2 trees from the site. However, they are small trees and don't warrant protection via TPO. They do, however, require mitigation in accordance with the council's tree replacement standard, but the council's tree officer is satisfied that they can be adequately replaced on site in the rear garden, and so a landscape plan showing this is secured via condition. In order to ensure that no further trees are harmed in the application site or surrounding, ground protection measures are proposed, and a condition is also attached to ensure that is installed prior to any works being undertaken at the site. With regards to ecology, the council's nature conservation officer has reviewed the proposals and again raised no objections. subject to conditions. Again, advice notes are added referring to wildlife legislation, which operates independently of planning. So overall, officers are recommending the application for approval, subject to the conditions set out in the report and summarised on screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm afraid I'm going to upset the officers, but that won't be the first time, I'm afraid. We've heard concerns about garden loss and the impact on the conservation area. We've also heard about the impact on residential neighbours and also highways concerns. Now, in my view, we could go on asking you questions and having the debate for another hour, but I'm not convinced without seeing the site. I'd be convinced on those issues. So I don't normally like this, but I'm going to propose actually deferral to our August meeting with an informal site meeting before. Now, for those of you who may not know the difference, there are two sorts of site meeting, informal and formal. If it's formal, you've got to be there if you can vote and debate in the next meeting. If it's informal, do your best to attend, but if for work or whatever you can't be there, that doesn't exclude you from casting your vote later. In my view, I would like to propose we actually do a site visit before informal and defer this report to our August meeting, and hopefully rather more focus, have more focused debate. Is there a seconder for that? Tom, thanks. Couldn't Gary please say a word?
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I think by virtue of deferring the application, it would lead to a formal site visit, but I think we could get further advice on that before we set up the site visit, so at least members were fully aware of the consequences of either attending or not attending the site visit. But we'll seek a legal view on that, but I think it would be a formal visit.
That's fair enough. Obviously, if the legal advice is it has to be formal site visit, fair enough. I just didn't willingly want to exclude anyone who was here, heard the debate, but couldn't attend the site visit.
Chair, so it might be just help just to clarify in terms of the issue of the resolution. If there is a formal resolution, then the normal convention would be treated as a formal site visit, as Gary Collins has said. Yeah. So an informal site visit would normally happen outside a committee. In fact, there would just be a decision to go and visit the site before it then came to committee. So normally, if we're making a formal decision on it, it would be treated as a formal site visit.
Jeremy. In that case, can we amend it to a formal site visit with a deferral until August? And that's moved by me, seconded by Tom. Should we do a name vote?
Yes, indeed, Chair. Just to clarify first of all, is there nobody else wanting any debate on the issue? Happy to proceed to that.
To be fair, if it's validly moved and seconded, it has to be put to the vote.
So, Don Alexander?
Against.
Tony Dyer?
In favour, but I won't be here.
4, yes. John Geeter?
4.
Philippa Hugh?
Abstain.
Chris Jackson?
I won't be here. I will abstain on that. Chair, I'm only subbing today.
Ed Plowden?
Abstain.
Andrew Varney?
4.
Richard Eddy?
4.
So that's 4 in favour, 1 against and 3 abstentions for a formal site visit.
Fine. So that formally concludes that item until next month. Can I thank you for your attendance and the officers, and just draw your attention to the next meeting on the 11th of August at 6 p.m.